call this meeting to order at 5:42, and I'll ask for any declaration of interest or general nature thereof. We have one declaration from Deputy Mayor Jeff Lackey in regards to PL-044-19. That's because it's an employee-employer. So we will ensure that Mr. Lackey will leave the room at the time of discussion and then return thereafter. Thank you for that declaration. We're going to move on in the agenda to number 7, which is the in-camera portion, to move the agenda along and give us more time in open session. So we will move into the in-camera meeting, and there's a motion for that. Moved by Councillor Mabey, seconded by Councillor Cody, that the committee of the whole adjourn to council in camera to consider instructions to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality to consider personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, we'll call a question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? Carried.
No, it's just a new book, and you're page 1.
22. So how's that with the zoning aids?
Well, I am 1.83 meters and I'm 6 feet, so 2.25 feet.
They know what they need. Awesome. So we don't do what we want.
Okay. I think our proposals are good. And we just have to convince them to let us have an extension to put their proposals together.
So we're going to start doing what we have done.
Well, that's what we're gonna ask.
Now we've got this. What did you say the job of private split?
About the land, about like whether or not it makes sense to rezone the area to have a lower setback, given other factors I just said. But you don't have it. Can you remind me quickly what since you're building, what was the date they came to your property? Was it August?
No, actually, it's just a couple weeks ago. The 25th.
That was last week.
No, okay, it was a Tuesday anyway.
So would it be
Tuesday last month.
October? Okay.
No, November. Yeah, November. It was on a Tuesday. Just a minute here. I'll tell you. I just got my calendar. I feel like my calendars. It was the 12th. Mm. Because I have all my clients in there. I usually go Tuesdays, or June Tuesday, that's work.
been. I've always been.
little trouble, so you got some excitement in your life.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
We were great about those young lads though. Especially the one. Yeah. Used to that was twice and just, yeah. He really doesn't have any personal skills.
All right.
Oh. Next time I'll just ask for you to come. What days do you work?
Oh, really?
The one young lad's absolutely amazing. He comes in, chit-chats away, plays with the dogs, and the other one's just like,
Yeah.
Get that.
Oh, yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
we're just so used to you, that's
I guess some place where I deliver, they're just awesome next week, you go.
Wow. You're in there.
Pointing at your ankle.
Hey, how are you? Good to see you again. See you.
TBS can't probably. I don't know about resolution. You know, they go just past the bridge. Yeah, I was coming home.
Yeah.
Went up the road. Yeah, they didn't do. There was a house that was about 5 minutes out, and as soon as I was there, I got back or something.
Here, I thought you'd be in Florida or someplace. Oh, no? Stroke of midnight, the old team.
No, so he comes down, I come down to find winter. And after that, well, we got
You've been
on for a lot more. Well, I think, I was wanting Syracuse. They had all these underground.
We got our new copier in, we got our oxygen stuff done.
Yeah, so I did this, going to state state.
Thanks, Don.
How are you,
I made some calls about our little disaster here.
Everything,
There's nothing to do with it at all.
it's been done on it, if it's dormant for 10 years.
And they took the light off the top.
So,
Did the hydro.
what time is it? 6
23.
So,
Yeah.
Every time the tax reports for the year, that's going. Yeah.
Okay. You want them in the car, right? Okay. For a period of time, how much of the
What's closed, what's
Yes.
yeah, I showed you that. I know. Good to see you. Thanks so
I didn't see you. Oh, you were, I was out with you. Because I said you were there. Sorry to hear. Well, you know, I think it's probably better out. It seemed like she was going over with downhill.
Bill being.
Don't get up.
Good luck with your work.
How are you fine? Hurry.
Yeah, well, it was good to close here.
Certainly all blend up and fine as well. Yeah. I'm happy about it.
Well, there are a number of.
Yeah.
There's two spots there.
Brothers and sisters.
back to order. We convened council at 5:42 to go in camera to get that part of our agenda out of the way and save some time as our public meeting ended quickly this evening. So I received direction in camera from my council, and I will move forward with that direction as they provided it to me. So moving right along in regards to our agenda, number 3, delegations and presentations. We will ask Mr. Francis, Detachment Commander OPP, to come forward along with his cohort, Mr. Kingsley. Thank you, gentlemen. Just if you could state your name and your position, please.
All right, good evening, your worship, members of council. My name is Mike Francis. I'm the Detachment Commander in Leeds County. This is Josh Kingsley, my operations manager, also in Leeds County. I sent earlier the billing report, and that's for the first 3 quarters of the year. And the reason we just go to the end of September, this quarter is still obviously ongoing. I'm also going to report on some of our proactive efforts in the township. As far as the billing summary, it's relatively unchanged from a violent crime perspective, and property crime is really trending downward. Before I move on to some of the other comments on the billing model that you should have, is there any questions in regards to the content?
I don't believe we received the content in advance, so
Oh.
we're just seeing it this evening for the first time, so I apologize. We don't have.
Okay, well, just to take you to the billing summary, there's a detailed part of it, the summary, just details the groups, so violent crime, property crime, drug possession, statutes and acts, and it's the billable hours that's billed back to the township. So the current billing model, as you know, there's the base funding that covers the proactive efforts, and then there's the base. So this would be under the 60%. And it's approximate, but 60% is generally a 60-40. And really the calls for service over the same 3 quarters last year are relatively unchanged. So 2018, first 3 quarters, there was 4,630 calls, and for the same period, it's 4,600, so relatively unchanged. Violent crime, for instance, there's, 1 is the difference. One of the other comments I would say in regards to the billing, one thing that does jump out at me is the 911 calls. They continue to trend upwards, and as you know, they're not only billable hours, but it takes it's a 2-member response to a 911 call. So for instance, the first 3 quarters, so back in 1st of January to the end of September, we responded in your township alone to 345 911 calls. And those would be hang-ups, pocket dials, and just drop 911 calls.
I have a question.
Yes?
Is there any way to extract from the data how many of those calls come from 401?
Those are all calls in the township. They have been pulled off the
Right.
401.
The reason I ask just for interest sake, because I'm part of a task force in regards to traffic safety on 401, and we do bill back to NTO for calls for service through our fire department. It would be interesting to me to note if there is some way for us to know how many 911 calls came from the 401. Not because it'll affect our billing, but just for interest sake, because it is something that weighs upon our volunteer fire department, and it is information that I need to take back to MTO because the funding doesn't come, we end up bearing the brunt of it as the municipal taxpayer, so this is something that I would have interest in.
Sure. Yeah, I can, we can send you a message. I can send you those numbers anytime.
That's fine, and I'll share them with the rest of council. Thank you.
But just so you know, these 911 calls are not 401. These are strictly in the township.
Strictly from the township, okay. Councilor Morello, you have a question?
If the sergeant is done.
Sorry, or you want to?
Well,
We can do the whole presentation, or we can ask questions during the middle, if you want.
Just to put this in perspective and through you, your worship, when I read budget numbers, I see numbers of $290 odd per household for OPP services. And I haven't had time to digest this billing report, but could we get a brief summary of how we are billed by the OPP? is it per household basis, or is it on this detailed billing summary? I'm a little confused at this point.
The treasurer might be able to answer that question.
Through you, Your Worship, so I apologize, I've actually included a summary of the statement in the budget document that you'll be receiving on December 16th, and it does go through an explanation of the billing model as well as a comparison over last year.
So we'll get that explanation shortly. Thank you.
In addition, I can just, from a high-level dashboard, answer to you. We have a municipal policing bureau. They have a funding formula, and the formula is based, as I said earlier, on a 60-40. So there's a base cost, and it is per household. There's a base cost. So your vehicle patrol, ride programs, impaired drivers, or proactive policing efforts are not billed. They put a time standard on other calls for service. So as you can see, there's, I don't know, probably, what, 80 different ones. So an assault, there's a weighted hours that's assigned to it. So that's what's billed, and that's province-wide. So in addition, just to get into the first 9 months from a proactive standpoint, in the township alone, we've done 2,197 calls for service. In addition to that, 1,261 hours of vehicle patrol, 14 hours of motorcycle patrol, 16 hours of marine patrol on inland lakes. The 248 hours in the St. Lawrence, as you know, are not billed to the township. We've, in the township, 20 impaired incidents, and we've issued 743 offense notices, and that ranges from the Highway Traffic Act, Cannabis Act, Liquor License Act, all the provincial statutes. In addition, I just want to update council as well in regards to our mobile crisis intervention team. For those of you that aren't aware, we partnered with Brockville General Hospital. We have a mental health nurse that works 5 days a week in our office, and I partnered her with one of our members. And their mandate is to really, they work collaboratively with all the county resources for individuals that are in crisis. We realize that mental health isn't always, or isn't a police matter. We're not the experts in the field, so it's nice to have those individuals with us. Just to give you an idea, from August 6th to the end of September, they responded to 82 calls. So the byproduct of that from a township perspective is if we have an individual that the police are encountering multiple times, each one of, that's call for service. And really, on the health side of the house, it may not be really a criminal matter. It may be a variety of issues that's causing that person to be in crisis. So by getting this engagement and working collaboratively to get them the supports they need, we notice that our calls for service drop off, which is really, our goal from policing, and obviously carers on the mental health side. Also wanted to let council know that the OPP has relaunched its online reporting, which is an option for residents. They can, any mobile device, tablet, computer, they can go online to report minor crimes. Again, it's an option if they choose. So, theft under mischief, theft from vehicle are all options people can do to report online. And that's the website's just opp.ca/reporting. They just punch in their location and they can self-report. Additionally, I just, years ago, the OPP, due to all our fingerprinting are managed by the RCMP, and we do digital fingerprints. And the units are very expensive. So in Leeds County, we had one unit, and that was based at the Leeds Detachment, the host detachment. So regardless, aside from criminals, a lot of folks need civil prints taken for employment purposes. They would have to drive to Leeds. I just want to report about a month ago, we secured a second unit that's now housed in the Lansdowne Detachment, so that should have a big impact on the community as well. Is there anybody have any questions in regards to report?
Deputy Mayor Lackey and then Councilor Wolf.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to go back and touch base on the 911 calls, and I noticed here that the biggest one is calls drop. And, it's my understanding that our self-service is supposed to be getting better. I'm just wondering, if there's an explanation as to why so many calls are being dropped now as opposed to previous, when our our cell reception is supposed to be improved?
A lot of what I can speak is just to what I know. A lot of the calls, as soon as it goes to 911, regardless if there's anybody on the phone or not, it's automatic that we're dispatched. Because I've been to the calls where something's been in progress and the phone's been pulled out of the building. Speaking about cell phones, I think everybody's got, even we used to say one, but now a lot of people have two. And it's the pocket dials, it's the drop calls. They realize they hit their emergency button and they just hang up right away. And it still requires us to respond and make contact with whoever made the call.
What happens around a lot of times too is people will have old cell phones they give to their kids without a SIM card. So those phones don't connect to any wireless network. However, those phones still have the capability to dial 911. So in those kinds of circumstances, they get registered as a dropped call with a GPS location, but we don't have a way to trace that back to a subscriber of any kind.
So it's certainly, as much as we're risk adverse, it's something we still dispatch our officers to.
That still adds to the bottom line on there.
It does.
Yeah.
Councillor Oakley?
Good evening, Inspector. I'm not sure if I heard it or not, but for the new fingerprinting service, what are the fees for that?
They vary. Volunteers, there's no fee. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
No fee. Well, for employment, I think we're at $42.50.
$41, and then if the person needs fingerprints, so a vulnerable sector check for a resident for employment purposes, it's a $41 fee. And then if they do require fingerprints as a result of the check, there's an additional fee, I believe, of around $90 that gets charged back to them. But any volunteers, regardless if they need fingerprints or not, is a free service.
And those fees aren't set locally either. I'll just throw that out there.
Thank you for that clarity. Any further questions? Councillor Foote?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the inspector. I'd like to think of us as a somewhat peaceful township. Can you give us some examples of what falls into this violent crime area?
Sure. Your assaults, your sexual assaults, I'll just refer to it here. Utter threats. And again, in the billing, just real quick on the billing model, these are the primary instances. So a lot of these, for instance, a sexual assault or maybe assault, you wouldn't be billed for the sexual assault and the assault. You're billed for the primary, which would be the sexual assault. But all the assaults, bodily harm, aggravated with a weapon, that's everything that falls under violence. Domestic violence, because that's when you spill into assaults.
I know this is not exactly the specifics of what we've been given. There's been quite a spotlight put on human trafficking in the area in the last little while. Do we have any specific statistics, because we live at a border crossing, if that is a major issue here? Mainly because we think it's a sleepy little town and that we're living in a beautiful part of the world, but we don't always think that these things happen, and they happen all around us every day. So maybe you can provide some context to that.
What I can say is the township is not immune, nor are the others throughout Leeds County. We have and continue to investigate human trafficking incidents. As far as the port of entries, and I can't report on that, that falls outside of the scope, but we do have specially trained members that are engaged, and I can't say there is ongoing investigations.
Appreciate that update. Councillor Jameson, you have something to add?
Just if I may, Your Worship, just to look at the violent crime statistics or billing categories of that number. I mean, we're looking at 667. Is there a correlation to actual charges laid?
Yes, so the billing is billing. So aside from this, you're asking me about clearance rates. So I don't have them in front of me, but what I can tell you is our violent crime clearance rate is high 80s, low 90s for percent clearance rate. What I mean by that is we may have an assault, and if you recall a number of years ago, there was a review done on all our sexual assaults. where, be it unfounded, insufficient evidence to proceed, the victim may not want to proceed, we can clear by charge, or it's unsolved. To date, none of our sexual assaults in the township are unsolved, but from a clearance rate perspective, so they're all cleared, but it's just the status of them. And if you'd want me in the future, I can report to you on our clearance rates. That's part of our action plan, actually, in Leeds County, victimization, and I can report that to council whenever I come in the future. I can report whatever you'd like within the parameters.
Your worship, I would appreciate seeing actual, that point where these, building numbers, because, everybody discusses money, but at the end of the day, what's the health and safety?
Absolutely.
How are we doing here, and not only that, it's not just a question of policing, it's a question of what is the community's investment in ensuring that health and safety is foremost in our minds. So I'd like to know what is actually happening with respect to charges and convictions.
Yep.
We would appreciate that. Thank
Not
you
a
so
problem.
much. Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and for you, Inspector Francis. One of the things that I keep hearing is Highway 401, and I know that we're not totally talking about Highway 401 here, but for the constituents that are always saying, why is there more police on the 401? Having looked at this list, you're doing a lot of jobs throughout our township and province, regardless. But how many officers may be on the 401 at any given time, so that people can kind of get a clarity that you're pulled in so many different directions?
I unfortunately can't give you that number because it's that fluid. For instance, an hour and 15 minutes ago, we were both on 401, so I could tell you that there's two on. But an hour and 15 minutes ago, we were both at a violent domestic right after, within seconds of being on the 401. It's that fluid. As far as how we allocate our resources, it's largely dependent on party calls for service, where do they need to be, intelligence-led approach. For instance, the number of traffic complaints we get from residents, doesn't matter if it's this township or any of the other townships, are there. So we need to be smarter about allocating our people. So we have devices that help us do that. They tell us when, for instance, the speeding occurs, and that's when we would target that time, as opposed to just putting a car out there, and obviously not all day. I mean, realistically, in Leeds County, there's approximately 3,000 kilometers of roads that we patrol, be it township, county, plus the 401. We can't be everywhere, but I personally feel visibility is a good proactive tool, as much as enforcement. So that falls back to our engagement piece. But on 401, no, it's one thing to consider is that's a conduit for our members to get from Thousand Islands to the host detachment. A lot of times, so for instance, an hour and 15 minutes ago we made an arrest, that individual is being transported to Leeds. The courts are down there, that's where they're transported in the house for the night. We could do it up here, but it's just easier for our court officers to take them down from there in the morning. So as far as being on the highway, it really varies, sir.
And just as a follow-up, and thank you for that, because that's the important part, is that there's so many things going on that our residents need to know that you guys are out there doing so many different things that you can't be just in one spot all the time. And thank you very much for the great job that you are doing out there.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Any further questions for the delegation? The CAO would like to make a comment before we end the delegation.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to thank both of you for attending the meeting with senior staff that we had. It'll be covered off in a report from the Director of Planning and Development this evening. It was very fruitful. It focuses on communication, and we really appreciate your input. So thank you very much from senior staff.
Thank you for that, and I know in the future some of the additional things I add in my reports for the benefit of council.
Thank you very much, and I think I would just reiterate what Councilor Ravy said, that we do appreciate your being first responders in our municipality. We know it's a difficult job, and You're well worth every penny we pay, and we appreciate you being here when we go.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, members of council.
Moving on with the next agenda item, Peter Fitton, President of the Thousand Islands Association, in regards to a funding request. We have props. Actually, if you want to bring them right to the front and face the camera, that way people out in the world that is watching us, they can see us. Thank you so much.
Next one on my driveways, we've been with one of them.
Just
You-
need,
Yeah, you got it, perfect.
just need a quick lesson while we're in. I pointed. Oh, it wasn't on.
Yeah, it should be on right there. And just an arrow either way to go forward. There we go.
Good evening. Good evening, Your Worship, councillors, and officials of the Township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands. My name is Peter Fitton, President of the Thousand Islands Association, also known as TIA. I appear before you to make this presentation for a request of funding in the amount of $20,000 and for a partnership alliance with the township going forward. I have a lot of material to cover in 10 minutes and would be pleased to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. TIA was founded in 1934 as a River Property Protection Association, and it evolved into a volunteer shoal marking organization. We are 85 years young. TIA is a not-for-profit corporation with charitable status, and it's managed by a volunteer board of directors. To date, TIA has been self-funded by membership dues and donations, business sponsors, and occasional minor grants. Our mission is supported by 3 pillars: to promote river safety, environmental awareness, and community support. Our developing vision includes to maintain an essential service of shoal marking and other initiatives for river community safety, to encourage education through workshop and stewardship of our cherished river environment for present and future generations, and to use communication platforms available today to connect and strengthen the community relationships. Where does TIA operate? Well, the answer is essentially the territory of your township in the St. Lawrence River. 90% of our shoal markers are placed from the Bateau Channel off Howe Island to past Rockport, and 10% are on the Brockville Islands. This slide is a partial map of the township showing the interconnection of the St. Lawrence River properties and communities in the township's territory. TIA views the river community as those falling under 2 categories: citizens, comprised of individuals and families of territory constituents and seasonal visitors, and secondly, commerce, comprised of service providers and municipalities enjoying a commercial connection with this river community. This slide details the regional breakdown of percentage based on TIA membership records. It shows where current concentrations of membership exist. TIA membership sits at around 700, less than 1/2 of its membership 10 years ago. Membership recruitment and renewal is being challenged by demographic issues and by competition from other interest groups. Our programs and initiatives, starting with river safety. Our flagship program is river shoal marking for the safety of islanders, shoreline residents, and boaters. But we do more than this. TIA is underway with GPS technology, mapping rock markers for charting apps. We provide financial support to local emergency response units such as fire departments for waterfront equipment when funds are available. We conducted a fire pumps program in past years and supplied a defibrillator to the Gananoque Marina. And we look to reactivate a neighborhood watch program, the origin of TIA. Environmental awareness. We are underway with 2020 initiatives by networking with existing environmental interest groups with ecosystem expertise, such as Save the River, Land Trust, and Watersheds Canada. TI's vision is to promote workshops and stewardship and to use this mission pillar to strengthen and better connect our township river community by reporting through our communications media. Community support. We have invested in communication platforms to provide means to connect with the river community on all fronts. The influence of these communications is significant. For example, the TIA Water Levels Committee brought the community together for a recent October presentation on Plan 2014 and what needs to change. A letter to the IJC was further advanced by TIA endorsement together with others, creating a voice for 125,000 plus riparians, municipalities, and business and agricultural association members. This year, we also supported Township River community with free issued no wake signs. So what is our basis of request for funding? Firstly, TIA is the only organization providing shoal marking of the township's St. Lawrence River territory. This is an essential service to the Township River constituents and visitors. Shoal marking has become a waterways infrastructure, just like the roadways in the township mainland, falling within public necessity and safety. Public opinion believes shoal marking is or should be a government program. Secondly, the abundance of dangerous shoals and the forces of Mother Nature has caused significant and growing needs for the shoal marking essential service. The fluctuations in water levels have become extreme, and many forecast this to become the norm. So TIA's dilemma is threefold. One, there are growing needs for TIA's service and presence. Two, TIA has an aging inventory of shoal markers and hardware requiring replacement. And three, financial resource requirements for TIA to remain sustainable have grown beyond what membership dues and donations can support. TIA's essential service is a natural opportunity for visible township support. Here is a snapshot on uses for this funding support. TIA has a break-even and growing operation budget of over $55,000 per year, which excludes an unfunded liability for forecasted additional shoal markers and existing inventory replacement. This slide itemizes requests for support. Each of these components are fundamental to the mission of TIA and to membership and township constituent expectations. TIA needs to plan for an unpredictable life expectancy of shoal markers and to create a reserve to fund its inventory replacement. TIA also foresees a requirement of 10% or more increase in the number of existing shoal markers to respond to uncertain future water levels. The Township River community has grown to rely on TIA for its safety and should ask the questions: what do we believe this essential service is worth? And what is the value of the lives of Township River constituents? TIA is proposing a visible partnership with the township, not just for the year 2020, but every year going forward. TIA is requesting financial support derived from Township River constituent revenue to support a waterways infrastructure and a shoal marking essential service. This would be a visible commitment of tax dollars received, benefiting the safety of the township's widespread river community. There are 1,864 islands in the Thousand Islands, and TIA's request for $20,000 represents the taxes paid by only 3 to 4 island properties. We propose a TIA Township Steering Committee to drive the partnership agenda on worthy initiatives and on requirements for annual funding support. An organized presence on the river and TIA communication platforms would be available to the township to access other untapped benefits. This partnership alliance would be a model for other municipalities to respect and to follow, encouraging them to also provide support. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Peter. Any questions? Deputy Mayor Lucky.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Mr. Fitton. How are you doing, Peter? As a member, and I think you know where my loyalties lie, but I have to play devil's advocate and ask the question of who else have you reached out to? Because if you look in the media, if you look in all the marketing materials that are out there, you know, everybody's putting their claim to fame on the Thousand Isles, Kingston, Brockville's the gateway, Gananoque. You know, have you put this request to those people who, and you brought it up in your presentation that it's, to be honest with you, the residents are they're the smallest portion of the people using the river. So is there another avenue or another resource that we can look at to provide this? Is there a surcharge somewhere that we can utilize? Because quite frankly, I mean, the river is not ours. It's Transport Canada. And I understand where you're coming from. Like I said, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I pay my dues. And the other question I have is the approachment to the grant committee. Because the grants committee looks at not operational but capital projects, which this would fit very nicely.
Thanks. Thank you for those questions. We had quite a few there. Essentially, we started with the township because this is your territory. Our territory is your territory. It's not the city of Kingston. There is a portion out of Brockville, and we do intend to talk to Brockville. But the constituents that do use the river, even whether it's federal jurisdiction or not, the federal government only places channel markers for the general direction of traffic, not the shoal marking essential service that we do. So where else would we go for funding? We certainly need to approach that question because we are headed right now into a deficit. We are concerned about sustainability. We would like to see whether the township would provide us a leadership role. And it isn't just the funding in the grant. We're looking for a permanent partnership going forward that we could also return some benefits to the township in connecting the community. It's one of our mission pillars.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I guess another point to make is that when we decide any of this, whether we do, whether we don't, it's whether we set a precedent. We've got a lot of associations out here. We've got the Charleston Lake Association who puts show markers out. We have to be careful not to open Pandora's box, if you will. So I think there's more discussion to be had, but I don't think it's a yes or no tonight, at least not for me. We've got to look more at this, I think, from a legal point of view as well.
Right.
Our job is to protect the municipality from, everything. Again, the presentation was great. Like I said, I'm a card-carrying member, and I know where you're going with this, and it's an invaluable service. But as you know, I've traversed a lot of waterways, and there's a lot of places that simply don't have it. They don't have that shoal marking capability. I've used GPS, I've used radar, I've used all of those toys to circumvent hazards, especially at night. So, again, just to play devil's advocate, I
Right.
think we have to look at a lot of things.
I think the second part of a request, one was funding, the other was the Partnership Alliance. I think that Partnership Alliance and creating a steering committee might hit the nail on the head with some of the points you're bringing up. We're not looking for you to be backed into a Pandora's box. We're looking for sustainability on what we believe has become a waterways infrastructure and an essential service. And if that would be a beneficial way of having us walk through the issue, we welcome that.
Councillor Rowe?
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship, and thank you for making a very nice presentation, actually. I do have a question. Essentially, we're talking 3 areas of money here. You have no wait zone signage at $5,000. You have shoal marker capital costs of $15,000, which would surely put it into our procurement policy area. And then you're looking really, I guess, for annual support of $10,000 into our operating budget. Am I correct so far?
You're referencing the letter that we wrote in October. We expanded that to give it more clarity in the presentation. And if I can go back to that slide, I could, thank you.
Perhaps while we're searching, I'll just carry on with the statement through Your Worship again. We have, before this council and before this township, we also have the potential for the signage for speed limits as given by a report by Dennis Roberts some months ago. And Dennis's report was dealing with several of the channels, and it's one regarding speed, and the concept being speed keeps the weight down. It was highlighted at that time that there is going to be significant cost to that program if it goes through, because it is going before the federal government, and we have not come close to understanding the cost of procurement of the signs, placing of the signs, and so on. And I see here that we don't have mention of that, and I think it would be very, very significant. Again, I know it's not the purview of the Thousand Island Association, but it is certainly in the same bailiwick, and it's going to be a lot of money coming down to this township, potentially.
I appreciate those comments. Well, I think our organized presence on the river provides an opportunity to address that. And if we had a steering committee, we could see how we could encapsulate that. That's the partnership we're looking at. We have a presence and a force on the river. Not sure how you would tackle that unless other agencies were going to come and place that signage. I'm not sure, but that provides certainly the opportunity of where the partnership could go and how we might, some of the untapped benefits that I mentioned earlier. But to go to your original question, on this particular slide for uses of funding support, let me just get my copy here so I can see it. The wake signs is we were looking for 2020 funding. The $5,000 that the TIA absorbed in issuing free no wake signs was a 2019 issue. And we're looking to absorb, we're absorbing it right now, and not really absorbing it, we're taking it on the income statement. So we hope that's non-recurring. But it's not giving us a welcome introduction into 2020, if I can address that one. The shoal marking inventory replacement of 15,000. Shoal markers have, if you ask the manufacturer, life expectancy of perhaps 5 years. It's unpredictable. It depends how they're hammered. So that's a 20%. Assuming that you bought these shoal markers in a staged procedure, you would be replacing 20% of your shoal markers essentially every year. The shoal marker costs about their cost without some handling is about $250 each. That's my friend that's right in front of you on display, together with chain and anchor. But that's like you buying let's that land it on the truck. That doesn't put it in the water. Okay, so if in round numbers, if you had 200 shoal markers at 20%, just to see how we got those numbers, you'd be addressing 40 shoal markers per year to replace, maybe more, maybe less depending on Mother Nature, and there's $10,000 if you push those numbers out. Then for additional shoal markers with the unfriendly extreme water levels that we're experiencing, we're predicting another 10%. We had calls this year to go out and mark new danger zones that were previously above water that no longer were above water, and now it's a new opportunity to help protect the constituents of their waterways. At 10% of 200, that's 20. 20 times 250 is another 5,000. So quickly you get to $15,000. That's just the purchasing. That's on the truck. It doesn't get it into the infrastructure, into the waterway. It just it presents it. So that's the $15,000 on that slide. The next number moves us into the annual support, and that's like maintaining your roads. Well, we have to maintain the shoal markers, so to put them into the water or on top of the shoal and to take it off the shoal, to do minor repairs on the chain and anchorage and so on, and to chase them when they break loose. This is an escalating cost that used to be less than $10,000. This year it's cost us $14,500, a huge increase to maintain that. The Environmental Programs Initiative, that has to do with our scholarships and to programs that we're trying to launch, not trying, we are going to launch with Save the River and others, with Riverkeeper programs. That's been budgeted going forward into 2020 at $4,500. And the communication platforms, that's an ongoing expense with website, social media, our electronic newsletter, and I said website maintenance. That's the posts and the maintenance on those programs. That's a paid service that we're having to incur. So that's the slide really we were showing. As I say, we have an operational budget of over $55,000. We were looking for funding support of $20,000. 20,000 was on my.
Councilor Brady, and then we'll have to wrap this discussion up and then take any questions from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the total budget for TIA should be fairly substantial then. The other thing is that there's so many islands as there ever were out there, and with cottages, but your decline in money's coming in is basically from new families who are purchasing the cottages and not putting into the fund, because it is truly voluntary.
Exactly, and that's one of our dilemmas, as I explained. We see it as twofold. There's demographic issues, and we see that as the next generation, and you can define that whatever that means, but it's not my generation. But they think that it's a government service. They haven't lived the years on the river to understand how this has evolved and how this has developed. So we're having challenges with renewals. Patterns are that some people renew every second year. It's not just the transition of people buying cottages. It's the next generations that are coming along. The parents that were loyal and understanding the value of the service we're in. The next generation, not necessarily. And of course, there's so many other interest groups that, like, where do I put my membership money this year?
And just one follow-up, your total budget for the year will be round numbers?
Excess of $55,000. That's a break-even budget. We're not for profit.
Any further questions for Mr. Fitton? I'll add my 2 cents. I only became a member of Thousand Islands Association this year. We've been voters for 4 years previous to that. So I am remiss and maybe should make further donation. But one of the things that, as I'm sitting here listening to your presentation, maybe it's something that every voter needs to contribute to, not just cottage owners seasonal residences, because if you're using the waterway, the whole point is that hopefully you can take the boat out in one piece, and having those shoal markers is an important part of that.
Right.
So maybe there's an opportunity for marinas to become more proactive and helpful in regards to the shoal marking, whether that's a $25 surcharge for those who aren't members or can provide membership or not. And I guess that would be something that the board would have to go and look for. But I'm just thinking that it's hard because there's nobody policing boat launches in our municipality to take money at those points of entry, if you will, or the town of Gananoque where they enter at the Lions launch there by Joel Stone. If they're using the waterway and they're not the ones necessarily, they're the ones benefiting from your foresight to mark the shoals. I think it's imperative that the voters that come to our area somehow, if there's any way we can capture that, that would be incumbent upon the association. That's just another suggestion.
Point taken.
Any further, Councillor Fody, and then I'll take questions from the public.
Thank you, Your Worship, to Mr. Fitton and TIA in general. First of all, I want to thank you or congratulate you on your presentation. It's condensed, concise, and quite frankly compelling. It's one of the best I've seen brought before this council. Having said that, I maybe concur with our deputy mayor. There are some pieces in here that overlap. Just to sum it up, your proposal to maybe come together with a steering committee with the council, I think is our best approach to all this. As our mayor just said, we have a lot of people who take this for granted. And quite frankly, they do it such as it's free. And I think the steering committee will come to the bottom of a lot of this. But I thank you for a quality presentation.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Any questions from the public? Anybody would like to step forward? Seeing none, I will put a motion forward, moved by Councillor Fody, moved by and seconded by Councillor Maybe. That committee of the whole recommends that council thank Mr. Fitton for his presentation, and that the Thousand Islands Association be directed to submit an application for a community grant. All those, or any discussion on the motion? Deputy Mayor.
Two things. Could we add to that, that perhaps the township acquire a corporate membership yearly?
Look into.
And that we apply a member of council to the steering committee if one is set up.
So that's an amendment to the motion. Okay, and a second, Councillor O'Keefe was second. So the clerk will draw that up. Councillor Jameson?
Just want to hear that amendment.
In its entirety, we'll restate it.
Didn't mean to muddy the water.
Your association, it covers the U.S. as well?
Yes, the presentation I'm making today is only for the Canadian TIA. There's an American TIA as well for Americans to donate to. That's a separate issue. We don't, the shoal markers, we provide some support in providing shoal markers to them, but Save the River carries the cost to place them. For liability reasons, we don't work in U.S. waters.
It's the same marker that's used at the
Yes,
other side?
yes, we're the conduit to provide the markers.
Councillor Fody?
Your Worship, while we're waiting for a summation here, you had mentioned about chasing some of these. Are any of the markers stolen?
Well, I wouldn't know, but I doubt anybody wants to steal them unless they're being refused to have a shoal marked in front of their island. People can, we've never thought of selling them to the general public because who's going to put it in and out? I don't know. It's usually the violent action of Mother Nature and buoyancy and
If you go out on the river, you'll see lots of plastic milk jugs that are used quite effectively, painted with fluorescent.
Right.
The duck hunters are not your friend either.
Yeah. If you'd like to come forward, I need you to come forward and state your name, please.
David Orr, I've retired from the board, but I was on it for 22 years. To answer the question of selling shoal markers, we sold virtual shoal markers. We raised $17,000 for people donating $500 for a 5-year, that they got the right to have a picture and of their shoal marker. And then we decided we'd make that last forever. So whatever number we sold, but we did get $17,000, and then that's dried up because those people that liked that idea, they stopped. The other people. The other one, we have to ask Jeff how many shoal markers he's got, and 2. But they're old beat up ones. It's okay.
Like I said, they're full of bullet holes.
Yeah.
So the motion, as it stands now, moved by Councillor Fody, seconded by Councillor Maybe, that committee of the whole recommends that council thank Mr. Fitton for his presentation, that the Thousand Islands Association be directed to submit an application for a community grant. And the amendment was moved by Deputy Mayor Lackey and seconded by Councillor Oakey, that the committee of the whole recommends that council direct the staff to acquire an annual corporate membership for the township. So we'll debate the amendment first, and then go back to the main motion if it's, depending on whether it's accepted or defeated. Councilor Fody?
Thank you, Your Worship. The only question I have with the amendment, how many organizations are we going to join now? I understand the reasoning. I think we better separate these two. That's just my opinion.
Any further discussion on that, Councilor Jameson?
I support Councilor Fody's point of view on this.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, or Deputy Mayor?
Sorry. I think the wording was that we just look into it. It didn't say we
Yeah,
would.
that's all it's staff to inquire. That's how it's. Okay. So it isn't to direct staff to get a corporate membership, it's to look into it. So with that, we'll vote on the amendment, which is that committee of the whole recommends the council direct staff to inquire about an annual corporate membership for the township. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify. 2, 3, 4. All those opposed? 2. The amendment carries. So the motion in a whole, moved by Councilor Fody, seconded by Councilor Maybe, that the committee of the whole recommends the council thank Mr. Fitton for his presentation of the Thousand Islands Association be directed to submit an application for a community grant, and that a committee of the whole recommends that council direct staff to inquire about an annual corporate membership for the township. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion in hand, please signify. All those opposed, carried. Thank you again, Mr. Fitton. We appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to do some shuffling with the agenda with everybody's So we're going to ask that planning report number PL-040-19 zoning bylaw amendment Z-219-004-946 Sand Bay Road come forward in the agenda. So we'll debate that first and foremost. Does anybody have an issue with that? We have the applicant and her legal counsel here, just to not prolong through the rest of the council. Page 9. Any discussion on that, or do we have consensus to move that forward in the agenda? That's fine with everybody? Okay. So, seeing that's the case, then we will ask Ms. Webb or her counsel to come forward and speak to the planning report that's at hand.
All right. Good evening, Council, and good evening, Your Worship. For the record and for the video camera, my name is Kendra Swallow, and I am the lawyer for Ms. Webb and for Mr. Webb with respect to the zoning bylaw and generally with assisting them in navigating their dog kennel issue. So given that you all have the report in front of you, I know you're aware of the history, but just to give a quick summation, Ms. Webb has been in possession of dogs for the better part of 15 years. She has often been the recipient of a hobby kennel license from the township. However, approximately 2 to 3 years ago, it became evident that her dogs no longer complied with the hobby kennel license parameters. There was then a discussion about whether a commercial kennel license, the only other alternative license, might be a better suit, but then it quickly became evident that her property was non-compliant with the required 300-meter setback. So in attempting to find a way to make her property compliant so as to obtain the proper kennel license so that she could keep her animals, she has put the application before you to rezone her property so as to reduce the setback by almost half. So given the requirement that had been put to her to amend her, to get the zoning bylaw amendment, she was advised in May about getting several reports. And given the fact that the setback was considerable, it makes sense that the reports were substantial. Unfortunately, there have been some limitations, most notably the finances of Ms. Webb, and she has not been able to secure all 3 reports. She has, however, been able to secure one, which I'm sorry, I'll pick that up after. She has been able to secure one report, which I will discuss at a later time. So cutting to the chase, I know that you are all in possession of a copy of the report with respect to Ms. Webb's application containing the recommendation that you deny it. So first and foremost, I want to make sure it's clear that we are not asking you today to deny or to approve Ms. Webb's application. We're merely asking for you to defer her decision and to request an adjournment to a later council session. This would be to allow Ms. Webb to amend her application and obtain the requested reports and include a bylaw amendment to include a 3rd kennel license. Our intention with respect to navigating Ms. Webb's kennel issue is to put forward a proposal that the Township of Leeds and Thousand Islands adopt a 3rd category of a kennel license. So as I've indicated, and as I'm sure you are all aware, at present there are 2, a hobby kennel license and a commercial kennel license. The one that we would be proposing is a breeder's license. Ms. Webb's current application before you is, as I've indicated, pretty considerable with respect to a significant setback requirement. And while this would certainly be significant and require the data that had been requested of her, the fact is that Ms. Webb's current dog kennel habits and her proposal with respect to running a dog kennel is in no way close to the scale or scope considered for a commercial license. She's more than prepared to restrict her dogs to 10 as a maximum, and the number of litters that her dogs have to 1 per year. A brief research with respect to the bylaws of surrounding municipalities all indicate that they have this 3rd category to varying certain specific parameters. So while the requested reports that were made of Ms. Webb on May 23rd certainly make sense, what we're hoping today is to have a discussion with respect to having a more limited set of requirements put to Ms. Webb in order to ensure that she can comply with the requirements to get the appropriate license. We understand that there has been some criticism with respect to the length of time that has elapsed from when these requirements were first communicated to Ms. Webb to where we are today, where there has been no reports put before you. As I've indicated, we did receive one. Ms. Webb was able to secure the funding to obtain the noise study, being deemed the most important one given the complaints that were made regarding the dogs barking. And despite numerous requests, we only received a draft copy of the reply at 5:22 p.m. today. So to cut to the point, Ms. Webb is requesting an adjournment to, I understand that there are council meetings on February 3rd and February 10th. to enable her to have sufficient time to put together a comprehensive proposal for your review. She will, of course, work with township staff in order to obtain the required reports and any other data that may deem necessary to ensure that the proposal that is put before you at this time is sufficiently detailed so that all of the concerns and considerations with respect to adopting a third kennel license can be properly reviewed and assessed before the council, and with amending the dog kennel bylaw appropriately. It's our assessment that really the issues with respect to Ms. Webb's kennel application is twofold. One is the noise issues that have come up with respect to some neighbor complaints, and I'm certain you will hear about it from some neighbors who are present today. And number two is the question of which kennel license would be appropriate, if any, in order for Ms. Webb to continue to have her dogs. So as indicated, provided there is an adjournment granted, we will of course disclose the noise report the moment we get a final version. But I can tell you, just in reviewing it within the last 90 minutes, that the initial noise report indicates that provided a fence of approximately 8 feet with tongue and groove wood is constructed around a limited area that had been proposed and communicated previously to council staff, that would sufficiently offset the distance that is avoided by the 300-meter setback requirement. So in other words, provided the appropriate fence goes up, there would be no noise violation for the two surrounding neighbors on either side of Ms. Webb's property. The second issue is the issue of which kennel, and as indicated before, while Ms. Webb does breed her puppies, she is prepared to restrict her breeding to 1 litter per year, and she now has every intention of whatever the number may be. At present, she has 10 dogs, and she's prepared to cap it at that and never have any more than 10 dogs. I'm certain you'll agree this is nowhere near the parameters of a commercial license. Yes, it exceeds a hobby license, but it is nowhere near a commercial license. So that is why we would advocate for a third category of dog license be applied. So if Ms. Webb were to be granted the adjournment that she's requesting, this would obviously create a bit of a time issue, given that we're currently at December 2nd, and whether the adjournment is granted till February 3rd or 10th, or perhaps the March meeting, whatever, I would, of course, leave it to your discretion. There remains the question of any noise between now and then, in order to ensure that the neighbors do not have to suffer any disturbances in that time as well. Ms. Webb and her husband are prepared to work with city staff, and once the noise report is disclosed in its final version, provided city staff agree and endorse this line of action, the fence can be constructed immediately. So at this time, we would welcome any questions or comments from the council and from your worship. And we look forward to moving this matter forward, hopefully to a conclusion. Thank you for your time.
Councillor Wilkie?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'd like to take my question to the planner. I assume there is such a thing as a breeder's license. Do the setbacks actually change anything?
Madam Planner?
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I think there's two different matters that may be getting intertwined here. So there's a canine bylaw for the township. There's also a zoning bylaw for the township. The application in front of council is for the zoning bylaw amendment. And the definition of kennel in the zoning bylaw includes breeding, boarding, as well as just having dogs for your own personal pets. It's the zoning bylaw that establishes the setback distance of 300 meters, which is required in the zoning bylaw. The canine bylaw then sets out the requirements for being able to obtain a kennel license. And the canine bylaw contains the definitions for a commercial kennel or a hobby kennel. So in looking at proposing a separate category for a breeder's kennel, breeding is contemplated within the zoning bylaw, within the definition of kennel as it exists.
Any further discussion or questions from councillors here? Councillor Foti?
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you explain a little more what you're referring to about a tongue and groove board fence eliminating noise, or alluding to that at least?
Certainly, Councillor. Again, unfortunately, despite requests, we only received the draft copy of the noise report that was obtained from Ms. Webb about an hour and a half to 2 hours ago. So unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to review it in full, but I understand from conversations with Ms. Webb and the conversation she had with the people who conducted the noise study, is that they believe that provided the fence that's done with the appropriate type of wood, with the tongue and groove material, and is constructed to, I can tell you, my apologies, I believe it's 7.4 feet. It would be sufficiently a sufficient alternative and achieve the same means as the 300-meter setback. And so I'm completely in agreement with Ms. Venditti that there is two separate issues here. There's the issue of how to control the noise, and there's the issue of how to appropriately license Ms. Webb for the dog that she hopes to have. So again, once the report is in my hands, I will of course immediately disclose it to the council, but it's my understanding from reading the report and from speaking with my client that their recommendation is that provided the fence adheres to their recommendations, it would be an adequate substitute to the setback.
Yes. I'll be looking forward to your clarification on this at your future time, if that's what's going to take place here. But having lived literally on that road all my life, and it wouldn't matter where in this township you live, you would have a hard time impressing me that any height of a tongue and groove board fence is going to suppress noise. And then again, who meters the noise? Is there a auditing meter going to take place, like a
Well, you can.
a decibel count, I guess is what I'm getting at?
Well, that's an excellent question, Councillor, and that would be a perfect example of the things that Ms. Webb and her husband would be prepared to work with council to ensure adequate testing is done to support it. And your concerns are certainly well-founded. My father runs an acoustic engineering firm, and I am very well informed about the testing that is often required with respect to adequately addressing sound. And even still, even if a fence complies with the recommendations of an engineer, you never know whether a certain decibel or a certain noise, or what happens if a wolf gets in there. There are all sorts of certain variables can come into play. The question remains whether it would be appropriate, and this would be perhaps a question once the report is disclosed, if the area that the dogs have access to on Mr. and Mrs. Webb's property is restricted to a fenced-in area with a fence that completely adheres to the recommendations of the sound engineer, and the dogs all being in the yard and people on the perimeter of the fence adhere to testing with respect to the decibels, and a comparison can be done, and I'm sure a comparison was done with the sound testing, whether that would be suitable to comply according to council standards as a substitute to the setback. There is, and while I appreciate all Ms. Venditti's comments of that there are two separate issues that may be conflated, they do, it is my interpretation at least, go hand in hand with respect to whether or not there is a way of enabling Ms. Webb's property to conform to the setback requirement would inform what is the appropriate dog license in order for her to move forward with her pets.
Councillor James.
It's really a question for the planner, through your worship. On page 95 of your report, last paragraph, or second paragraph, or maybe first, anyway, it says no detailed plan showing the layout of the kennel on the property or the details of the fencing locations and materials have been provided for staff review and consideration, and that would be at the date in which this was forwarded to council. So my first question, your worship, is that been satisfied?
Through you, your worship, as Ms. Swallow has indicated, no, we have not received any of the updated studies or information or plans. Some of the recommendations of the study that she's indicated that she's in support of would be necessary to provide that information and those detailed plans for staff review.
And follow-up question, and sort of in that vein, I thought I heard earlier in your presentation that in effect you would like to see a new status of licensing, through your worship. A new status of licensing, I thought I heard that, am I correct? And in which case I would like to ask the planner if we were to entertain the idea of a new status of licensing. I think I know the answer to a couple of these questions, but how would we do that? How long would it take, and how much would it cost us?
I'm sorry, guys. I thought that was a question for
Through you,
you.
your worship, just for council's information, the definition in the zoning bylaw as it exists says a kennel shall mean a building or structure or portion thereof where animals are bred, boarded, groomed, or trained, given medical treatment, or housed for similar purposes for which compensation is paid, and shall include a shelter or a pound. So the definition of kennel that's in the zoning bylaw is quite broad, and the requirement of the zoning bylaw is a 300-meter separation distance. The applicant is applying for a reduction in that separation distance. Should council be supportive of the required reduction in that separation distance, and it's reduced through zoning, then there's no need to amend the definitions within the existing canine bylaw, which then defines a commercial kennel as a place where dogs are bred, and a hobby kennel where you can have up to 5 dogs. So I don't see the need necessarily to amend the definition of the type of kennel, because breeding and the keeping of dogs is contemplated under all definitions. It's a matter of addressing the setback requirements of the zoning bylaw.
If I may address the council, if I may build on the planners, is that your perfect title? I apologize. Comments. Our position is not to necessarily complicate this application beyond the scope of what is necessary. It's simply our position that the 300-meter setback with respect to the broad definition of kennel within the zoning bylaw, the broadness of the definition of kennel is actually works not to Ms. Webb's advantage but to her disadvantage, because it is designed to encapsulate a much larger scope of kennel than she currently has or ever plans to have. Our position is that the setback is designed to control higher levels of noise than her dogs would intend to make if they were capped at 10 and 1 litter per year. It's not our position that council simply adopt a third kennel proposal and do away with the issue that her property does not comply with the bylaw. It's merely to adjust the standard so it's a little more reasonable with respect to the number of dogs that Ms. Webb hopes to continue to have. So given the fact that it's 10 and not 50, like a normal commercial kennel license or even 100, that if she were to comply with the noise reports and any other requirements that may be put to her by council, that perhaps these two issues, while separate, can work in tandem toward finding a solution so that Ms. Webb does not have to get rid of her dogs.
Deputy Mayor and then Councilor Magee.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I want to preface this by saying that I've always owned dogs. I always will. I am a dog person. But I left Lansdowne probably 12 years ago because there were over 11 dogs on my block. My wife worked shift work. It literally became unbearable that I couldn't go out and enjoy my swimming pool, my back deck, without listening to somebody's yappy Pomeranian or whatever it may be. We decided one day we're selling, we're moving. We're going to the deepest, densest forest we can find, and it was because of dogs. Like I said, I have one. My dog doesn't bark. It's trained, and it's not trained not to bark. Dogs bark for various behavior reasons. But the moral of the story is we do have commercial kennels in the area, and when they bought and built, they did so because they met all of the criteria to become a kennel, because that's what they came here for. They met the separations from their neighbors, they met all the criteria, that's why they bought the property and developed it. And I think it would be a slap in the face, if we were gonna do that, we should have done it for everybody. Because it cost them a lot of money and time and research to figure out where they could build a kennel, because it's serious business. It's big money business. And it does affect the lives of your neighbors. So I'm just not a big fan of parking dogs. I think, if you can somehow meet the setbacks, I'm all in favor.
Councillor Maybe, and then Councillor Oki, and then we'll take questions from the gallery.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. We can travel up and down 401 and see many barriers put up that mediate sound and noise. And certainly a wood barrier or solid fence may do the same. One of the other problems that I have is that there are neighbors close by who, even past the dog noise, have talked about offensive language. And again, if we can't address that, then we're not going to solve the problem either. So until the sound barrier and language is changed, we'll see how we can make this happen. That it's going to be a better fit for our community.
Councillor Oki.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to support the views of the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Maybe. When I was canvassing during the election, some of the strongest issues people had as individuals were the near presence of dog kennels, licensed or otherwise, and on several roads, back roads. The other thing is, in a previous life, I had some experience with sound attenuation, specifically masking sounds, and I very much doubt that a tongue-groove board fence would give you a 45% sound attenuation.
Councillor Jameson.
With respect to the discussion about noise and so on, I hear all that. Some of the nicest dogs I ever met were during camping somewhere. But the point is that this is an incomplete application. With respect to my understanding of reading the application, it's not complete. So therefore, we're at a point when the clock is ticking, and perhaps the clock has come to the end of its run. And the paperwork that we're seeing here, putting aside the comments of citizens who are concerned about this, is not something we can deal with anyway, because it's an incomplete application. So at this stage, we're being asked to, I understand it, defer. And I guess my point of view is, I think we should just recommend to the applicant that we just say goodbye to this particular process, because it's gone right out of control in terms of its completion. And a lot of letters that are very convoluted. And just say, let's start, if you're really serious about this, start this again. And I would be very reticent to entertain the idea of minimizing that setback that's already in the existing way.
Just maybe for some further clarification, Madam Planner. I think one of the reasons why this has been brought forward is because it is an incomplete application, and the legal counsel for Ms. Webb has indicated that they're just receiving the reports and that sort of thing. But I think the concern for me, and I think for the planning staff, is the length of time this is taking. This has come forward in May. I believe that the planning staff has been in contact with or has tried to contact the applicant on a number of occasions to get this moving forward. So the challenge is that if we delay this again, there's still no conclusion. So, I'm not trying to take a hard line, but at the same time, when there's an application process that's been brought to the attention of the landowner, that there are rules and regulations that we're trying to follow, and we're not trying to be difficult, but that there's expectations, because when complaints come forward from neighbors and residents, we have to take those as seriously as the application. So I'd like to hear from anybody in the audience before we make any decisions or come to any sort of consensus here at the table, if that's available. Is there any other further questions for Kendra and Ms. Wall? Seeing none, I'll take questions from the gallery.
Certainly. If I may make one final remark before gallery questions are canvassed. Yes, I understand that there has been some delay and that has been frustrating to the process. Simply to comment on that, it's financially prohibitive. Ms. Webb obtained estimates with respect to the 3 reports that were sought from her in the email from the planner on May 23rd, and it was upwards of $35,000. And for the average citizen to come up with $35,000 extra dollars is considerably prohibitive. She was able to obtain the funding to secure 1 of the reports in time for this meeting, well, barely in time for this meeting. And while I appreciate that the request for an adjournment would be further frustrating and perhaps seen as an unnecessary indulgence or confusion to the process, Ms. Webb would be prepared to accept an adjournment with the expectation that it's then or never, even if it's to the February 10th or 3rd meeting. And with the expectation that she would have a fulsome report with the noise study, with a proper explanation of the tongue and groove and the attenuation of sound, and have a proper, complete report put before council.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. So do I have any questions or concerns or comments to be made by the public? Please come forward. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go with Councillor Maybe, and I'm going to go with Councillor Burrell, and then we'll go forward with that.
Thank you, Your Worship. The one question I have is, even if we extended, we just heard that the finances to do these reports is quite high. Are we going to, and do you have the means to get those reports done, given the financial burden that it may pose?
Sorry, I'll return to answer the questions, I'm sorry. Yes, Ms. Webb, as indicated, is prepared to fully comply with any other obligations that are put to her, even assuming an adjournment is granted, say, to the February 10th meeting. She would expect to be in constant communication with the planner as well as through me to ensure that the necessary reports are put before council well before the next meeting date.
Councillor Burrell.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship, and it's really a comment regarding a deferral on this. And we have in front of us, pure and simple, a zoning bylaw amendment, which we could vote up or down. And what is being asked is a deferral so that a potential small business can try and thrive. I haven't heard a ton yet that I want to shut the door to that. And so my take on this would be, I don't think we're losing a lot by deferring it to January, March, a very specific date. And if at that time things aren't settled, we can be here and we're all well apprised now of the issues. But I could not at this time vote to amend that zoning bylaw. And I also would point out that members of the public could easily take that to LPAT in a heartbeat and then cost this township some money getting that taken care of. So I would actually be in favor of a deferral if that's what's being asked.
My apologies if I didn't use the right nomenclature. A deferral would be what we were requesting. Yes.
Deputy Mayor, I'm sorry, do you have anything for Deputy Mayor Lackey?
Through you, Your Worship, this is committee of the whole. We understand that there's some new information to come. Whether we approve or deny this tonight really makes no never mind, because we have that week of sober second thoughts before it comes to council for ratification. So I'm sorry, but this has dragged on long enough, and I'm opposed to reducing the 300 meter. I'll just put that in there right now, but we've got a week for them to give us the information that they may or may not have before we actually really approve or deny or ratify the decision next week if it's chosen to be pulled.
So your suggestion, if I'm reading between the lines, would be that we take this off the docket for tonight and put it on the docket for council?
No, I believe we take a vote on it, and either way, but like I said, it doesn't come into effect until we actually pass it at council next Monday.
Fair enough. So the motion that is being presented now, and then we have the week to review any further documentation that comes forward, and then we move forward or we don't move forward. That's your recommendation. Any further discussion on this point before I put a motion on the floor?
Just a question. Motion that is currently on the floor, or are you making?
I haven't made a motion. We have the presentation first.
Right, okay.
So the motion,
So we're finished with public commentary.
There was no comments from the gallery at this point, so
Okay, so
unless
we're-
there's any further comments.
We're finished with the comments from other people other than council, and we can move to the business of council?
Yes.
Okay.
Councilor Cody, you have anything to add?
Your worship, all I'm asking is that you clearly read the motion we're voting upon.
So I'll put the motion on the floor, then moved by Councilor Olkey, seconded by Councilor Lackey. A committee of the whole recommends that council deny the application Z-2019-004 for the zoning bylaw amendment for the property located at 946 Sandbay Road to rezone the subject property to a special exception rural zone to reduce the setback for a kennel from 300 meters to 163 meters from residential uses. Any further discussion on this motion? Councilor Rowe.
Sorry to do this, through you, Your Worship, and to the planner. If this was denied once, the amendment to the zoning bylaw, can it be brought up again at a future date?
Good question.
Through your worship, there would be a need for another application. Once council has dealt with an application and made a decision, a new application would need to be submitted. It doesn't preclude the potential for another application with additional information.
Councilor Cody.
Thank you, Your worship. So to our planner, referring to what you just stated, if we voted this down tonight, these people could come forward at any other time, you know, be it holding off for accrue monies to spend on these studies or whatever, but it would basically come back in the same format, but just a different date.
Okay.
Through your worship, there's a couple of avenues, that being one. The other would be if council does deny the application, the applicant does have the ability to appeal the application to the LPAT and could potentially bring those studies and that detailed technical information through that forum for a second, well, for an LPAT hearing and a review of the application.
So the other piece, just to clarify, Councilor Cody, that if we vote in favor of the denying the amendment, we still have a week before we solidify or ratify it at council.
Every week to change your mind.
Any further questions or comments, Councilor Cody, and then Councilor James?
Yeah, I have an issue with putting it, I know this has dragged on, we've all followed it for quite some time. Council representing the clients here tonight has stated that she received this one piece of information at 5:22 tonight. You know, to only give them a week to work with, I tend to concur with Councilor Gorell that what's another 2 or 3 months to get this done right, rather than have to go through the whole process again. I would, the motion the way it is, I can't agree with it.
Councilor Jameson.
Just to say, Councilor Foley, I appreciate your perspective. I guess my concern is that reading the report and reading all the other materials, it's still an incomplete application and has been an incomplete application for a very long time. And frankly, I think to the benefit of the applicant, to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and start the whole process again might be a better move than continuing in this convoluted fashion that is going on right now. So I would personally support denying the deferral or whatever it is in order to give the applicant time to breathe out and rethink the whole process and do a bit more straightforward fashion to the rules.
Deputy Mayor Lackey, and then I'm going to call the question.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. I'll be brief. Any other rezoning or planning? We have the Thursday afternoon information sessions where people can come in and let the individual CRCA, health unit, or planning department, we're more than willing to help with these type of items. So the tools were always there, and quite frankly, you know, you don't do this and then get your ducks in a row. You get your ducks in a row, then you come see us. So I think there's some more docs to come.
Okay, so I'll call the question, I'll reread the motion just so everyone is clear as what's on the table. Moved by Councillor Oakley, seconded by Councillor Deputy Mayor Lackey, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council deny application Z-2019-004 for zoning bylaw amendment for the property located at 946 Sand Bay Road to rezone the subject property to a special exception rural zone to reduce the setback for a kennel from 300 meters to 163 meters from residential uses. All those in favor of the motion, please signify, and please be clear about your voting. All those in favor of the motion presented, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those opposed? And it's carried. So we will continue on with.
I'm sorry, if I may simply just ask one follow-up question. I apologize for the disruption.
We've made our decision.
No, I understand it's a technical
You
question.
understand, and that's it.
The question is about compliance moving forward. It's my client's intention to obviously reapply, as has just been discussed, but my concern as her representative is about her compliance between now and reissuing the application in terms of enforcement of bylaws now that she's officially non-compliant.
Councillor Jameson?
This is a discussion for the planning department, is it not?
I believe so.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And bylaw.
And bylaw. It won't take effect until council ratifies, anyways, so if that's the course that council takes. Okay, moving along with our agenda, and we do have to continue to move forward. Going back to the original agenda, staff reports, administration report number AD-006-19, proposed schedule for meetings of 2020. And that the motion on the floor is moved by Councillor Fody, seconded by Councillor Jameson, that Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the proposed schedule of meetings for 2020 as presented. Any discussion on that motion? Would you like to turn your microphone on? Any discussion on that? Councillor, maybe?
Yes, I guess the only one I had was June 8th, which meetings on the June 15th, but I think there's a meeting or something happening that changes our usual process. June 8th will be the next one, like Monday, June 1st will be our committee of the whole, and next Monday, which is the 8th, would be council. Here it's saying June 15th.
Go ahead, Madam Clerk. Through you, Your Worship.
Thank you. So normally there's, the second week of June is the AMCTO conference, which is the Association of Municipalities, Clerks and Treasurers. And so potentially staff won't be here. So if it turns out that, for whatever reason, one or both or none of us end up going, we can have it on the 8th, but that's the reason.
Thank you for the clarification, Madam Clerk. Any further questions in regards to the schedule at hand? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the schedule as presented, please signify. All those opposed, carried. Next thing on the agenda is administration report number AD-007-19, emergency program compliance update. And the motion on the floor is moved by Councillor Fody, seconded by Councillor Jameson. The Committee of the Whole recommends that Council grant 3 readings and final passage to bylaw number 19-051, being a bylaw respecting an emergency management program for the protection of public safety, health, the environment, the critical infrastructure and property, and to promote a disaster resilient community within the township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands. Discussion on the motion as is presented. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I always write notes, but every time I reread them, I don't know what they're I have under here emergency management. What was the outcome of the high water discussions?
Sorry, say that again?
The outcome of the high water discussions.
You're talking about the mayor meeting?
Yeah.
I can give that report later on down the, this is a different, just to speak to the motion that's on the floor. This emergency management program for the protection of public safety and health. This is part of our emergency compliance, I believe. And Deputy Clerk Westgate is the one in charge of this. This is more of a speaking item, if I'm not mistaken, and it does not speak specifically to high water. Can we have that discussion further on in the meeting?
Well, no, I know there was some discussion at the time whether or not we were gonna make a decision for declare a state of emergency and that type of thing, so I just wanted to fit in there somewhere, but if it's later on, that's fine.
Well, I think that, if I'm not mistaken, what I read here from this particular report was that it would include that and then give us permission to grant the emergency status if necessary. But as we discussed last year, we're still in this year, never mind. I apologize. We did not declare a state of emergency mainly because we did not require the federal intervention with the assistance of Army, emergency reconstruction of roads or bridges, things that would require extraordinary public infrastructure or extraordinary measures.
I was just looking at page 3 of the report, and it says it should be noted that the municipal emergency control group was called together this year to discuss high water levels and prospective action planning in late April.
Yes. So you want to know the outcome of that?
Yes.
Oh, I apologize, I did not understand the question. So the outcome of that was that we would not declare a state of emergency at that time, not because it wasn't an emergency for the property owners along the waterway, but because there was, by declaring a state of emergency, we would jeopardize potential insurability of certain properties, because if they're dedicated, if they're put in a certain area that's where the emergency is declared, it could put them in a position where they would not be able to be insured any further because they're in what's considered floodplain, as well as they can't mortgage properties that are in floodplain. And where there's been an emergency declared, that's what's happening up on the Ottawa. The other reason we did declare a state of emergency is because we did not need those extraordinary measures. People were not stranded in their homes. People were not unable to, emergency services were still able to get to and from. Public infrastructure was not in crisis at that time in April. You would recall that we did reach out to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing in regards to DRAIL. They did not activate the plan. We asked them to come back out and reevaluate the area, which unfortunately did not happen at the end of the season this year. And would imagine that they'll be back out the beginning of this season, unfortunately. So this coming spring. Does that answer your question, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions in regards to the report in front of you and the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed, carried. Next item on the agenda, Administration Report AD-008-19, Amendment to the Information Security Policy. Motion is made by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Foley. The Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve an amendment to the bylaw number 19-048, Information Security Policy, to include a privacy policy as Appendix C. Do you want to speak to that, CAO?
I believe that the Treasury summarized the requirement for that. It's with respect to insurance.
Through your worship, it's basically a template that was received by the township from our consultant who's helping us mitigate risks with respect to cyber security and so on. So it's been vetted by the consultant. So.
Any questions in regards to the motion that's on the floor and the policy as it stands? I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but no further questions? We'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? Carried. And next on the agenda is Treasury Report number TR-011-19, Capital Project Funding. And the motion is made by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Fody, that the committee of the whole recommends that council approve the following budget amendments to reallocate budget and the related expenses from 2019 capital budget to the 2019 operating budget. Transfer the amount of the ongoing / consultant expense of $195,000, $65,000 for the Briar Hill, Escott, and Lansdowne landfill sites. Transfer the budget amount of $60,000 for crack sealing of 7.4 kilometers of hard surface roads. Transfer the budget amount of $15,000 for the bridge structure assessment update as legislated by the province. And transfer the budget amount of $5,000 to remove the DP in Centennial Park. Any discussions on this motion? Madam Treasurer, these are just housekeeping items to move money from capital into operating as they were already decided through the budgeting process, correct? Thank you. Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. Thank you. All those opposed? Carried. Next report is Treasury report number TR-012-19, taxpayer request for property tax relief. And the motion that's on the floor is moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Fody, that the committee of the whole recommends that council receives the taxpayer's letter and provide direction to staff as to how to proceed. Discussion on this motion. Councillor Maybe.
When reading this, thank you, Mayor. How's the property been repaired? I'm not sure when I was reading it what status it is. If it's taken back in, is it in a resaleable condition? And whether it's got the value that we really want.
Sorry, before we go any further, is the taxpayer that's requesting relief in the gallery? Okay, that answers that question. So the question at hand, Councillor Maybe, is have they repaired the property?
Yeah, it's kind of threefold. Have there been repairs taken? Because again, it alludes that it's been condemned and basically can't use it, so there's repairs required, and that it is a potential tax issue. Is the property at a saleable state? Will it cover taxes?
Okay. Madam Treasurer, would you like to speak to this?
Through you, Your Worship, I'm not sure if the property's been repaired or not. I can follow up with that question. In terms of whether the property, if it were to be qualified for a tax sale and we were to follow that process, I can't comment. I don't know the property in terms of if that would provide enough money to cover the arrears or not. So I apologize. I don't know the property myself.
Okay, so I think, before I weigh in on this, I'll ask some questions. Let everybody else ask their questions first. So Councillor Rowland and Deputy Mayor
I may have this wrong through you, Your Worship. The township did some mitigation in 2012, 13, and 14. Has that been carried on in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19? That would be one question. And secondly, is that property indeed, in terms of planning, is that property available to build on? I, some years ago, was familiar with that property, and it's in a state of disrepair, to say the least. But is it sellable, and is it actually something that a person can do something with at this point if it was sold? Because it's also my understanding that it was attempted sale sometime in the past few years. So two questions. Did we provide relief recently? And is that property viable to build something on?
Madam Treasurer, Madam Planner.
Through Your Worship, it appears to me that we provided some relief in 2014. However, we haven't provided relief since then. Unfortunately, Deputy Treasurer wasn't in today. I was going to follow up with some more details from her as she's been the one looking into this matter. But I can see where we did do a write-off in 14, but there doesn't appear to be any sense.
Madam Planner?
Through you, your worship, I'm not familiar with the details of this property, but I'm happy to do a review of it and bring further information forward to council.
Do we, I don't want to cross any lines, do we have any, I have data in front of me and I don't know if it's public or not, so I won't share it. But the write-off that happened in 2014 was considerable. Just remind the councillors at hand that we are not able under the municipal act to waive anybody's taxes. We have the ability to waive interest and penalties, I believe. That it's in contravention of the act to waive taxes. I guess my concern, Deputy Mayor, I'll let you go and then I'll. My concern is when you purchase a property, it is 100% your responsibility to find out the state of that property. And it is your responsibility to do your due diligence before purchasing that property. So while I can appreciate sometimes people fall into a money pit situation where they buy something, they bid off more than they can chew, or perhaps financial circumstances have prohibited them from making their payments. But there's a number of years from 2009 to 2013 where no payments were made. Maybe I've got that wrong. But anyways, there's a number of years that go by where no payments are made. So while I can appreciate that, if these people were consistently trying, it would be a lot easier to grant some leniency to extend terms. But it's a dangerous precedent we set if we can't be waiving taxes. But that also that when people don't do their due diligence, they're looking to us for their relief when something goes wrong with the property. So I'm not trying to be heartless here, but this property was purchased in 2004. This didn't happen overnight. So, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you for that, and that's sort of where I was going. The fact that typically when you buy a house, you go through a lawyer and you get title insurance, and you've got all those other safeguards, home inspections. So if those were waived at the time of the transaction, then I guess that's buyer beware.
Councilor Cody.
Thank you, Your Worship. In reading this the other night, I see three issues here that I have trouble with. Number one, this has been going on for 15 years. Number two, this property has already been given financial relief by this township. And thirdly, if we were to do the same again or something similar, what we're really doing is putting that weight on the taxpayers who currently are paying their taxes. And I think most of them are quite happy with the ceiling they're at, let alone put a little more burden on them. I'm not in favor of any relief on this property because of those three issues.
Any further comments in regards to this report or any questions to be made? So the motion that's on the floor isn't 100% clear, I guess, because it receives the motion is that the committee of the whole recommends that council receives the taxpayer's letter and provide direction to staff as to how we proceed. But we haven't, I guess, come to consensus as to what that direction is. So maybe we have a week to sit on this and provide the direction at council. Would that be consensus around the table? Okay. Then I will confirm and bring forward a motion at the council meeting that will provide direction, or one of the other. Sorry,
Don't
motion.
we still have to vote on it regardless?
Yes.
We change your mind.
Right. So motion is moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Fody, that the committee will recommend that council receives the taxpayer's letter and provide direction to staff as to how to proceed. Any further discussion on the motion? No relief? Okay.
Well, it's asking us to provide a direction.
But I didn't know if that needed to be subsequent motion. The way that it's worded, it's directed.
Right, so maybe we need to tune
Amend
that
the
up a little
motion.
bit, that
So-
we have the option to, we have option one and option two,
So before I call the question then, based on the consensus around the table, if there's an amendment to be made to this motion, please come forward. Councillor Fody and then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will take option 2, that we do not support this motion.
Option
So option 2 is to not support, sorry, to deny the property owner's request. Thank you. Just had to look up. So the motion would be amended to indicate, provide direction to staff to follow option 2. Is that correct? Is that okay with the mover, who is Councillor Jameson, and the seconder, who is Councillor Fody? It's fine with the two of you? Okay.
Your worship. And what follows from that motion, if it was voted in the positive, in the affirmative rather, what follows? Are we looking at what's tax relief, tax sale?
If, through you, Your Worship.
The way I've written the amendment in the motion here is provide direction to staff as to proceed with option 2. So you're not voting in the negative, or you're voting in the positive to make sure you're voting for option 2.
Which is to deny, option 2 is to deny the council, so council deny the property owner's request. But your question is in regards to the other option, is it not? Or I'm confused. Well, I'd rather we be clear before we make the motion. Okay, I'll let the CAO speak while you reread that.
I could attempt to clarify, and I don't want to speak for Councillor Earl, but I believe you were asking what's the implication of option 2? Does that mean a tax sale? And I believe the answer is not at this point, but the treasurer's indicated depends on, I'll let the treasurer fill in what would happen between now and January.
Madam Treasurer?
Through Your Worship. Sorry, I think it's in the report, but if they don't make the payment of what's outstanding, then it will go into the tax sale process, I believe is what the Deputy Treasurer's report said.
So they have to bring the account current prior to December 31st, correct?
I believe so.
So, and because this has been going on for 15 years, we've given lots of notice. Okay. While we're waiting for the printer to proceed, my guess is that as far as the property is concerned, and one of the questions was whether it was saleable or not. And because there's an original footprint on the property, my guess is it would make it saleable, depending on finding building permits and doing all the things that would need to be done in order to bring the property into compliance.
Through your worship, with just a quick look at the official plan designation on the property, what's there may be a legal non-compliant, non-conforming structure. So there may be limitations on the extent of the building. Without doing a detailed review, I can't comment for certain. But at a minimum, they would be able to repair and rebuild exactly what's there.
To be clear that they could knock it down and rebuild on the footprint, something could be rebuilt on the footprint.
Through your worship, something, but technically, in the absence of further approvals, it would likely be limited to the area and volume of exactly what exists on the property today.
So moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Fody, the committee of the whole recommends that council receives the taxpayer's letter and provide direction to staff to proceed with option 2 contained in Treasury report number TR-012-9. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, carried. Next on the agenda Community and Business Services Report number CBS-024-19 ESCOT Complex. And the motion that's on the floor is Councillor Burrell, moved by Councillor Burrell, seconded by Councillor Wilkie. That committee of the whole recommends that council direct staff to investigate options for the ongoing management and operations of the ESCOT complex, including the review of existing services and budget implications. Madam Goodman, would you like to speak to this before we take comments and questions?
Certainly. In circa 2015-16, council undertook a facility master planning process, and a number of recommendations came forward for this particular property. I'm going to preface it with some of that, but as we were undergoing budget review and as we've been having conversations about municipal modernization and looking at various services and whatnot, we do recognize that there might be some efficiencies to be had with that particular facility. This could be looking at, right now archives are operated out of 2 buildings, it could be consolidation into one particular building. In late 2006, a report came to council in terms of beginning to pursue options regarding sale of that particular property, with proceeds going towards the new Lansdowne Community Hall. We've had conversations about the garage being used as a potential satellite fire station. So we have a reciprocal agreement with our neighboring community. Are there savings to be had by offering services there? So there's multiple layers of, if we peel back the layers of the onion. So there's budget implications, service delivery, how can we be doing that more effectively, whether it's through archival services, are there other options for that property which aren't currently being investigated. I do know that we have a very active group that has also proposed looking at it as a more broad cultural center. So at this point, staff is seeking direction to kind of start diving into that in earnest, because it aligns with consolidation of services, finding efficiencies, looking at archival services, fire services, and a whole myriad of options and opportunities so that staff can provide the best recommendations in terms of future functionality or efficiencies at that particular property.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I would like staff to go back and pull or look for previous resolutions of council with regard to the ESCOT facilities, because I distinctly recall that a decision was made at one point, actually a couple of times, that we divested from that property. I was bewildered to see this back on an agenda. I know that I think the Historical Society wanted to do some sort of energy management study, and they wanted to do this and do that. But I think we should probably do a search of our resolutions of council with regards to this before we make any decision about it, because I think we're reinventing the wheel here.
That's good.
Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor Lackey, and through you, Your Worship. That was one of the things I was actually investigating earlier today, that there was a summary report that was brought to council, I believe in December of 2016. That summary report that was brought to previous council did include the recommendation that staff pursue sale of that property. However, when I go back and I look through the resolutions attached to that one particular report, there was no resolution to direct staff to pursue that particular item. And so again, I wanted to make sure that it was on the radar of this particular council to provide staff with the appropriate direction.
So we can definitely do further investigation as to whether there's anything else. Obviously, you've done preliminary investigation, and it doesn't seem that there was clear direction one way or the other based on the 2016 report, contrary to your memory, which I'm not questioning either one, but.
So there was a resolution that says that we divest, but we didn't divest.
Pardon me, that the report, basically I think the report indicated that the report be received.
Rather than direct.
That there was no direction provided to staff following that.
Councillor
I had the opportunity to take a look at it, I did some digging, and it it was not a resolution to proceed. It was a recommendation which was received. And the reason I took interest in it, because I, started looking at historical buildings, you want to look at it with care before you dispense with them. And it may be that once we take a look at what's going on there with respect to the condition and all the various other things that require severing, the severance issues, that you know better than I do. But I support the reality that I think council was proceeding in good faith to say, let's divest ourselves of this, but then it wasn't proceeding with any kind of time or manner.
Before you make a comment, Deputy Mayor, is there anybody else that has any questions in regards to this before we go back to the Deputy Mayor? Councilor Maybe?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. One of my questions is, if we're going to divest of the property, who's operating in it and where are they going to go? As well, is there any interest in the property that we're aware of that would make it more viable to divest ourselves of?
Thank you, Councillor Maybe, and through you, Your Worship. At this particular time, there are a few buildings on a particular property which I have referred to as the Escott complex. The first building is Springfield House, which is currently our archives, which are managed and administered by the library as per the MOU, which is dated 2018. So they're operating on 2 floors of that particular building. There may be some additional storage on the 3rd floor. They are operating currently in Escott Hall, so they use the main floor for storage, and I believe that there's some additional storage on the 2nd level. There's also a garage on that particular facility, which is used largely by Fire and Public Works for storage, and there's a small sand dome on that particular property as well. So again, this would be some of the items that we would have to explore in terms of various permutations if we were to pursue divesting ourselves of that particular property. Is there value in keeping part, all, none? What would the cost of that be? We would need to do a proper evaluation of the property to pursue that. At this particular point, because we haven't actually ventured down that, I'm not sure that there would be any particular interest. Other than that, that has already been expressed by the community organizations in terms of like a cultural community hub sort of environment at that particular property. But that would still be, I believe the proposal indicated that they would be looking for management and administration. It would still be municipal property, bottom line, I guess.
Councilor, maybe follow up, and then Deputy Mayor.
Yes, just as a follow-up, we talked about possibly it being a satellite fire station, and this question came to the chief. How viable is that, and is it a possibility? What's our personnel there? What kind of equipment would you want there if it is a satellite?
Thank you, and through your worship to Councilor Maybe. It is a viable option. We've looked at it over a few times. We do pay the front of Young substantial amount of money each year for coverage for that end of the township, which is over the 13 kilometers required for a good fire response. That building per se is a good building structurally, possibly. It would have to be evaluated as what upgrades we'd have to do, but it does have washroom facilities, water, heat, so on there. We do have surplus equipment that could go to that station. We do have personnel in that area that could respond, and that may result in a less requirement from a young to respond in our township. Something that we've looked at, evaluated before, but the costs associated with the building itself could outweigh the savings that we might see.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I think if somebody looks long enough, there's quite a few reports in this building to say all of what we're asking here now. Again, I see it as we're beating a dead horse because I think it was 2004, 2005, we actually had that up for sale. That was, I think, my first year when John Terry was here. Also, if I'm not mistaken, to accommodate the sale of part or all, because it was a shared well, I'm pretty sure we drilled another well so that that was possible. So again, somewhere in this building, there are reports to answer all of these questions that come before us.
So before, Councillor Jameson, I am acknowledging you, but I'd like to reread the motion because I believe that it will allow us the time that we need to dig up all the background information that you're identifying before any decisions are made or what have you. I realize that there's been a number of discussions and whatnot in regards to the ESCOT complex, but I'd like to do things properly and have the things on record. Decisions that are made by resolution and not recommendation. But the motion that is on the floor, moved by Councillor Burrell and seconded by Councillor Oakey, is that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council direct staff to investigate options for the ongoing management and operations of the ESCOT complex, including review of existing services and budget implications. I'm giving a broad stroke here, saying that that would also include reviewing past reports, past motions, past what have you, so that it can all be brought back together in a more comprehensive document, because I would echo the Deputy Mayor's concern that we continue to talk around this. So either, we bring all these information, these things together. It's probably no different than the Rockport studies that have been done over the years, and that, get shelved and nothing happens, or no decisions are made. But I'd like to think that this council will make decisions one way or the other, and do it with education and information, no matter how new or how old those reports would be. They're all information just the same, and we can interpret them and go forward from there. So, would you like to take a point?
The comment too, in this bucket of things we're looking at, because I'm definitely hearing the Deputy Mayor on this, is the state of the building. If there's a more discussion about maintaining them and using them, and a discussion about community groups or keeping the archives, is it up to the health and safety standards that were required, as a municipality? And the odds are they're not. But we are going, I'm assuming we will find that.
Yes.
I hope we are. The other thing is that we also have the staff looking at use of our other buildings. I'm thinking there's buildings in the two villages that the libraries use very part-time, and how we need to take a look at those in the long run. The other thing that this will probably bring into play is the archive MOU, and whether that is going to be something that we want to walk down the road with, given that we need to make some major changes in what we do with things, especially in light of Jesse Street comes to fruition. We're going to have to move some things around. So it's a broad bucket, and I agree with that approach, and I think we can satisfy the Deputy Mayor that we'll make decisions, and we'll do it in this council year.
Now, before I call the question, I do recognize that we have a number of individuals here in the gallery that have a vested interest in the archives, and if any of them would like to speak to this motion, I'd welcome their comments.
I'll go first. Pierre Mercier, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. When I first heard of this Friday, my antenna started to twitch, obviously. But having looked at the wording, I welcome this recommendation, because in the past, no such activity has taken place. All of the activities prior to this time have been taken in isolation, with insufficient information and insufficient consultation. There's still information being withheld or not being made available that would be very useful to community groups in terms of making a informed presentation for ideas. For example, there was an engineer's report several years ago, which has never seen the light of day, even though the Municipal Heritage Committee has asked for it many times. There has been an energy audit as well, not made available even though it was requested, and so on and so forth. This needs to be carefully considered because there are community implications that will reverberate. There are also certain legal things that perhaps we're not aware of. For example, there are many artifacts and antiques in Springfield House that were donated from the community with the understanding that would be put to use in the museum. What's going to happen to all that material? How are you going to divest of that? PGG? I don't know. But it's not going to go over well with the community. I guess I've probably said enough because there are other people waiting to speak back, but I look forward to the opportunity to work with staff and with community groups to come to a good resolution to this conundrum. Springfield House especially should be seen as an asset. Depends on which column you're looking in, but it's a terrific asset and we haven't been using it to its potential for several years now because we haven't done this kind of a study. So we need to do that. And I'll just pass on to my colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Messere.
Oh, by the way, one thing I almost forgot to mention. There was a management board for Springfield House before amalgamation. After that, it was taken over by the Municipal Heritage Committee, and somehow over the course of years, the management of Springfield House kind of fell out of the portfolio of the Municipal Heritage Committee. And if you look at the terms of reference for the Municipal Heritage Committee, I don't understand why that happened. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Olivier?
Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Glenda Olivier, and I am president of the Leeds and Thousand Islands Historical Society. And I do believe that this process is very much needed because I believe that there are some facts still unknown to the council which bear on decision making. I will further add that I believe in collaboration, not an adversarial approach. I think that we need to work together in the best interest of the community, whatever that may be. But I do know that there are very, very valuable and irreplaceable items at the archives, many of which are just, they're old. We can't digitize everything because that was one solution which was brought forward. At the moment, we have possibly about 30% of the collection digitized, but a digital record does not hold the same value as the original object. It can't often be used for things like heritage signs because it's not of the quality necessary for those heritage signs. So there are a lot of things that need to be considered, and I know that the executive of the Historical Society is prepared to consider and ponder and work to help make the best decision for the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further comments from the gallery before we call the question? Mr. Phillips?
Hello everyone, my name is Brian Phillips. For some of you who do not know me, you can look around at these plaques or at the wall of photographs out there or down the hall. There are a very large map of the township and actually of the whole county. My interest is personal here. These are my personal views and they come with two hopes. The first hope is that you will consider retaining Springfield House indefinitely for use of the community. It is a valuable heritage asset. Secondly, of course, is that you use that asset to its best advantage. And I think one of those possible usage would be as a museum. We have museums all around us in this heritage-rich environment of Eastern Ontario. We have them in Gananoque, we have them in Athens, we have them in Brockville, we have them in Lynn, we have them here in Allentown. They're all around us.
but they're not here in this township of 10,000 people. And we are heritage rich. We are part of that fabric. If we take advantage of it, we can have a wonderful asset there. Place where people love to go, and I know they do love to go. We've had the open houses in the past there where we've celebrated our heritage, and they've just been wonderful events. I would love to see that continue. I do not want to sell off our heritage. I want to preserve it. Our heritage is really the soul of our community. And if we sell off that, we are selling off our soul. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips, for the input. Any further comments to be made before I call this question? Councilor Cody?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question to Mr. Phillips. Do you feel that Springfield House has the capacity to hold everything that you care to put in there? Like I'm just asking, I know there's a lot in there. We took a tour ourselves here last spring, but does it have the capacity to do the envision that you're looking at?
I have not worked out that vision to any detail, so I really can't give a well-informed opinion on that. I believe it could be highly representative of our township, though, that with very careful curating and accession policies, we can present something that is absolutely outstanding. But we have to be very, very careful with those accession policies and not just accept everything, but accept what is most important to our heritage. It is the venue. It is just a wonderful venue to begin with, and a wonderful setting for those. We have 3 floors. There's quite a bit of room there, so we can do a lot with it. Also, things can be done even with the outside, with farm implements and things like that. Not everything has to be inside.
Thank you.
If there are any other questions, I'll let you answer.
I think we're good. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Councilor Burrow?
Through you, Your Worship, I think it is a valuable property, and I do understand the Deputy Mayor's thoughts. When I first took this position, I remember reading sales numbers of $144,000 were mentioned, and I don't believe a resolution was ever passed to that extent. But moving forward with municipal heritage, my belief is that it has taken on an increased importance with our Ontario government, and I would hope that this money would incorporate real funding, not something small, but something big, because the AODA alone would be tough on that property. And I do think that property does represent a significant cultural heritage for this township. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to call the question in light of the time because we need to keep moving with the agenda. So I think you've got a significant amount of direction, Ms. Goodman, in regards to the discussion that's happened here. So the motion that is on the floor, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, carried. Thank you to all that came to give us your input. I do appreciate it. Okay, moving right along with the agenda items. Community and Business Services Report number CBS-025-19, Youth Bursary Application. And the motion is made by Councillor Correll, seconded by Councillor Olkey, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the opening of a youth bursary application as proposed and approved in the Community and Business Services Report, previously Recreation and Community Partnerships, number RCP-00219. Ms. Goodman, do you want to speak to that?
Very briefly, thank you, Your Worship. Earlier this year, staff brought forward a report in terms of youth recognition, and one of the items was kicking off our first youth bursary. I know we had a conversation about how we're going to set that threshold, and staff have included in the proposed budget $1,000 so that we can hand out awards in the amount of $500, $300, and $200. Of course, our intent is to award this money the first week of May to coincide with Youth Week, and therefore we're asking for council approval to go ahead and open up that funding opportunity in January of this year. It would close in March, so that staff and our Youth Advisory Committee could review through March and April, with awards being granted in May.
Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? Carried. Thank you. Next on the agenda, Community Business Services Report number CDS-026-19, Municipal Modernization Program. And the motion is moved by Councillor Oki, seconded by Councillor Gorell. As the committee of the whole recommends that council direct staff to submit an expression of interest in the Municipal Modernization Program. Which staff member would like to speak to this? Ms. Goodman?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. So it was recently brought to our attention that under the provincial government, the Municipal Modernization Program has opened up for applications, or rather, expressions of interest. So the application deadline is coming up at the end of this week, actually, and staff have reviewed a number of opportunities where we could find efficiencies and whatnot in terms of modernization, application and adoption of new technologies, streamlining of service. Your senior management team sat down and kind of discussed a few different opportunities, recognizing that fire services is due to have a review of its fire master plan, in conjunction looking at business planning for the fire training center, that this particular department would be working with fire services to develop an application that would seek third-party review and report on opportunities to find cost sharing, adoption and integration of new technologies that would streamline services, make sure that we're doing the absolute best that we can with the resources that we do have. Basically, we want to reduce costs and provide stellar service.
CEO has something to add to that?
Thank you, Your Worship, and this was decided by senior management as one that we could go forward. Now there's a tight time frame to get it in. I believe there'll be a second intake where we can look at other departments, but fire services work with Ms. Goodman to get this together, to get it in now by the December 6th deadline.
Thank you for that clarity. Any further discussion on this motion? Deputy Mayor Mackey?
No, I'm in full support. I think it's great. I was just a little bit confused when I read it as to why this wasn't being done by fire admin.
I think it is more because Ms. Goodman's used to writing grant applications.
And fire admin did participate, Your Worship, with Ms. Goodman and the fire chief to put it together, and as the mayor said, she's good at putting those together, so it had input from both.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion at hand? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? Carried. Next on the list is planning report number, we already did that one. Planning development report number PL-041-19 OPA Commission. So motion on the floor by Councillor Oki, seconded by Deputy Mayor Mackey, that the committee of the whole recommends that council support the request to allow a site-specific official plan amendment application to be submitted for review. Madam Planner, do you want to speak to this motion?
Through Your Worship, under the Planning Act, when a municipality has a new official plan, there's a restriction on the ability for anybody to apply for an amendment to that official plan for a 2-year time period. So given that the official plan for the township has only been in place for a year, there's a requirement for council to allow an individual to submit an application. So what this motion is for, or what this recommendation and request is for, is simply to allow council to say, yes, we'll consider an application for amendment to the official plan. It doesn't mean you're supporting it. It doesn't mean anything other than somebody can apply for an official plan.
Councillor Morelli, you have a question, and then Councillor Oki.
I understand the concept is a timing issue, but I would like to understand what the application is being asked for. And as I read this, it's for boat storage, et cetera, on a piece of property that's zoned rurally. And under rural, if we were to take that further into the argument, there is no, at this time, I don't read any land use under rural that would allow for boat storage.
Madam Planner.
Through Your Worship, that's correct. So the official plan designates the property as rural. To modify the official plan to accommodate the use that's proposed, an official plan amendment is required. Under the Planning Act, because our official plan is new, council can say, no, we don't want to accept any applications to amend our official plan because it's a new policy framework. Or council can say, yes, we'll accept the application. You can submit an application, and then the application itself is reviewed on the merits and policies under the official plan.
So it doesn't imply that there's an approval that's going to happen. Okay, thank you for that. Further discussion in regards to the motion at hand? Councilor Roque, sorry.
Through you, your worship, can anyone explain to me how large this property is? How many acres?
Most of it's tree, there's 5.
It's rock ridge too.
Yeah, probably about 5 acres, and it's rock, or better. Deputy Mayor Lackey, maybe you can provide some context?
Basically, yeah, it's on the corner of Fitzsimmons Road and Granite Ridge. The only usable portion has already been leveled out, and I'd say the usable portion probably that he's talking about would be maybe a couple of acres, 2.5 acres, that's been leveled and sort of landscaped or prepped.
Mr. Maybe?
Yes, and the other thing is boat storage, and it sounds like a proposal for a building, but also with the neighbors in close proximity and it being a rural area, forested, would there be any consideration for blocking some of that sight line to white oaks in the middle of the winter?
Madam Planner, can you speak to that?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Your Worship. So the recommendation that staff are putting forward is just to allow the application to be submitted. All of the concerns that you're bringing up are absolutely things that would need to be reviewed through the process. Any amendment would be subject to review against the policies of the official plan, look at land use compatibility, look at visual impacts, look at buffering, mitigation, traffic, all of those other pieces. So all that's being requested is that council say, yes or no, we're open to allowing an application to be submitted, because you have the authority to say, no, we're not going to entertain any policy changes to our plan for a period of 2 years. If council is supportive of this recommendation to allow the application to be submitted, the applicant would then need to go forward and prepare planning justifications, detailed site plans for the property, elevations of the structure so we can understand the visual impact, the setbacks, the buffering, and all of those details in the review of the application.
Sorry, I just need to make everyone aware, because we started earlier tonight, we do have to pass the motion, so I'm gonna have to call a question on this particular motion unless there's something burning. Because all that this is asking is whether we allow the application to be submitted. It does not mean that we're approving the application, we have to go through the full application process. Councilor Rainey.
Real quick then, do we open ourselves up to more of these?
Madam Planner.
Through your worship, yes, you could be opening yourself up to a number of these, but each one would have to come forward for council consideration within the 2-year time frame. So we're coming up on a year right now, there would be another year where council would be open to these requests.
Deputy Mayor.
We've always been open to official plan. I mean, it's the way it always was. If they want to go through the process and spend the money, it is what it is.
Any further discussion on this motion? Madam Planner, you have something else to add?
Thank you, through your worship. Just quickly, all I would add is that we haven't received a lot of requests or development proposals that would necessitate an official plan amendment. So I would say, even though this may open the door to the potential, that potential's been there for the last year, and this is the first one we're bringing forward.
Okay, so I'll call the question at hand. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? Carried. Next motion on the floor is moved by Councilor Maybe, seconded by Councilor Fody. The committee of the whole meeting being held on December 2nd, 2019, be extended beyond 9 p.m. but not beyond 9:30 p.m. Any discussion on this? All those in favor, please signify.
Let's vote it out.
Not sure if they can see my facial expression on the video. Anyways, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna power through the last few. Okay, next on the agenda is the planning report, PL-042-19, River Valley Estates Draft Plan Approval Extension, moved by Councillor Olkey, seconded by Councillor Lackey. The committee of the whole recommends that council support the request to extend the draft plan approval for River Valley Estates subdivision. Discussion on this motion. Madam Planner?
Thank you, through your worship. There's some discussion in the report regarding the timeline for the extension. The applicant has identified 3 to 5 years within their request. If council is supportive of amending the motion, currently the county's standard is a year. However, given the progress that's been made and the amount of time that's gone into this overall development of the subdivision, council may want to consider the request again.
Councillor Meady?
Thank you, Your Worship. Since this property is very close to where I live, I have visited up in there many, many times and have seen the progress that's being made. And one structure going up, there's a trailer beside, and there's already a home there. So I would say that there is substantial work being done or has been done with underground infrastructure also in place, fiber optic cable, which is on the east side of the river, and I don't believe it's coming to the west side yet, which I tried to get. So I think they're making great progress, and looks like it's going to be a great development for our township.
Madam Planner, just so I have to be clear about what the motion is on the floor here, committee of the whole is recommending the council support the request to extend the draft plan approval for River Valley Estate subdivision. There is no timeline on here. Are you suggesting that we should be putting a timeline on it? Okay. So just factor that into your discussion, Nolan, when you're thinking about this. Okay.
Through you, Your Worship, to the planner, what is the recommended timeline?
Through your worship, given the amount of expense and design and work that's gone into this overall subdivision, an extension of a year is a challenge, I would suggest, in terms of there's no way the balance of the lots in this subdivision are going to be developed and registered within a 1-year period, which would mean that the applicant or the developer would need to be coming back for this request each year, which then goes up to the county for final approval and endorsement. So it would be my recommendation that the council consider a 5-year extension, which was similarly approved previously for this, so that all of those investments and the continuation of the building can continue.
So we're looking for an amendment to the motion then to extend the draft plan for River Valley Estates subdivision for 5 years. Councillor Fody, you're going to make that amendment?
Thank you, Your Worship. I could do that. I was really going to make a comment that I too, like Councilor Meady, I've been into this property. It's well laid in. The planner is not a fly-by-night, if you want to use that term. This has had extensive work and process put to it, and I would fully be in support of making a motion that we extend this for 5 years.
And Councillor Maybe will second. Okay, so the amendment would read that the extension would be for 5 years. So the motion as amended, moved by Councillor Fody, seconded by Councillor Maybe, that the committee of the whole recommends that council support the request to extend the draft plan approval for River Valley Estate subdivision for a period of 5 years. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, carried. Thank you. Okay, so next on the agenda is planning report number PL-043-19, OPP update information report. And the motion on the floor is moved by Councillor Lackey, seconded by Councillor Gorell, that the committee of the whole recommends that council receive planning development report number PL-043-19 for information purposes. Any particular discussion on this report? Sorry, Deputy Mayor Lackey.
Thank you, Your Worship, and getting back to resolutions passed, great memory, just doesn't last long. I thought we passed one that said we were going to establish an advisory committee. We were going to use the municipality of Tweed as a model. And I thought that was voted upon by this council after you and I sat down with these same people and established that that's what was going to happen.
We did. I think part of the challenge is, if I'm not mistaken, is that the policy, provincial policy is changing in regards to police services boards and police advisory councils or committees, if you will. I believe that is why this has been brought forward for the time being, because we could establish this now. It should have been established prior to now. I'm not going to mince words on that. But I believe that's why this is going forward. Ms. Vindier can speak to that.
Thank you, through your worship. As mentioned by the CAO earlier this evening, we did meet with the OPP to discuss whether it should be a police services board or community board and how that should work. Their response when we had that discussion was that there are changes to the Police Services Act that are going to be coming down probably early in the new year. So it would be premature to go down the road of trying to establish a certain type of board or structure when there's changes coming in legislation, and that when that legislation is changed and in effect, then we will look at what the appropriate structure would be in terms of how we set something up with the OPP. And so based on that discussion, they did say we're happy to sit down and have discussions about any community policing concern. We want to keep the lines of communication open, but right now it's not the right time to establish that type of board.
Deputy Mayor.
Follow through your worship. There never seems to be a good time, and that's why it came to council, and we made that decision. And quite frankly, twice a year doesn't mean squat. Doesn't mean a thing that's useless. You know, the reason for this committee was so that, you know, we can do that now. They come with it, usually they come at budget, they come at, you know, and make 2 presentations. We can do twice a year, every year, all day long, but that's not helping us. So I'm looking for something with a little more meat than this.
So are you looking to defer this until further discussion, or you want to discuss it tonight? CAO has something to add as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. The proposal for 2 days, 2 times a year for staff to meet with the OPP is something that could be changed. It was suggested by the OPP. We can meet with them quarterly to keep communication lines open between staff. Where there's also staff, whether it be fire services bylaw or whatever, through regular channels, and we discuss that with the OPP, where we are in touch with them as needed. It could be on a weekly basis, but as far as review goes, it's to put something in place while we wait for the legislation. And I would say that at that time, then we bring forward a recommendation, whether it be an public advisory committee, police service board, but in the meantime, adopt this process, and we'd be happy to consider meeting with them more often if that's what's required.
Deputy Mayor, follow up.
Thank you, Your Worship, and no offense, but the OPP really don't want us to talk to us. You know, we have to make them. This recommendation, you know, didn't fall on my head. It was made by another officer of the law who basically said, you gotta be kidding me, you don't have an advisory committee? Like, who holds them accountable? That's the whole idea is we're trying to, you know, if we have issues in, say, Lyndhurst, on every Saturday night, yet we have the OPP sitting down here in Lansdowne doing nothing. We need to communicate where our hotspots are, because we, being in the community, probably know more than they do. So it's to open that line of communication where, you know, rather than them spinning their wheels, we can direct them to where they can be most utilized in our communities. That was the whole idea behind it. And some of the things that have gone on in the detachment down here, I'm not going to say they still are going on, but, you know, again, they're not above the law and have to be accountable to someone. And that's the idea behind the advisory board. This is not something warm, fuzzy, that, oh God, look at us, we're doing something. This is nuts and bolts. Like, this is something that we need to have happen. And I guarantee you, the OPP, even though they're receptive, really don't want it.
So the motion that's on the floor is motion moved by yourself and seconded by Councillor Olkey that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council receive planning development report PL-043 for information, -19 for information purposes. I don't think that precludes us from continuing to move forward. And if we need to push that, and I know that you championed this. I had one of the first meetings that we had at the beginning of this council year was that. And I don't believe that they can turn down meetings with us, so we can set up meetings. But if you're looking to create the interest within the community to sit on that board, whatever that looks like at this point is irrelevant, but we need to find bodies, unless you're the only person on the committee, which I don't think is what the intent was. Was it? Am I clear? Okay.
No, Your Worship, generally the MPP picks someone from the community, one or two.
That's a
members
police
of our
source
council.
board. It's a bit.
No, it's advisory.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Grau, I'll leave you weigh in.
Through you, Your Worship, the reading of this should put that to rest. It says, because there are forthcoming changes to the Police Services Act, best to wait until legislative changes are in effect to understand the required format and mandate of any new advisory committee. Further, it states that this is a policy of meeting a couple of times a year in the interim, it says regarding an interim approach. So it sounds to me like we still have full powers to put together a committee, an advisory committee, under any mandate that we would.
So we can move that forward. Councillor Jameson, and then
I want to support what Councillor Burrell is saying. That's how I read it too. Because in fact, personal comment, hand-fisted hamburgers in Queen's Park, this legislation could sit on the table for a year and a half. So we need to move. I mean, even we have professional government, it's still taking a year and a half. So I would like to see it move ahead because I'm thoroughly in the corner. We have issues up in our ward up there, Councillor Olkey, and we'd sure like to bring them to the table and have the OPP address them sooner rather than later.
then the point has been made and we will move forward as it was originally agreed upon. So the motion on the floor, the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council receive the Planning and Development Report number PL-043-19 for information purposes. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, carried. Next on the agenda is the Planning and Development Report PL-044-19 Hall recommendation. Moved by Councillor, Councillor Rowley, you want to scratch his name out and make the,
Oh.
because it's Councillor Oakley that's just cross his name out. Thank you, Councillor Burrell. Moved by Councillor Burrell, seconded by Councillor Oakley, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the subject property to environmental protection special exception zone for EP4. Discussion on this motion? I'll just reiterate that Deputy Mayor Lackey declared a conflict of interest on this report, PL-044-19. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, carried. Okay, under other business, does any councillor have other business? Councillor Brown.
Through you, Your Worship, and quickly, I noticed that County Council, November 21st, that the Roma delegations were being discussed, and one that came to my mind was the municipal responsibilities agreements, and I believe it was Mayor who was going to go to Roma, and I think the position, if I got it correctly from county, was to have the province get rid of it. And he mentioned, I think briefly, that it was reaching a point of irrelevancy. That bothers me a little bit because this township should have a say in that Roma delegation, and yet we don't. It just passed by county council, and I think I'd like a opinion from our planning department, and I know we're running out of time. I guess I'm registering kind of an objection to the way that was done. It wasn't done, none of those delegations were supported necessarily by this township, except through yourself.
Well, and I'll apologize because I'm trying to remember the conversation that went around. We had extensive conversations in regards to all those delegations, and I'm trying to remember the specifics of what it was. I think if memory serving me, Mayor Boom was more concerned about the relevancy of the policy, making it more relevant so that it had more teeth. And I'm trying to remember the specifics, but I can't at this point. If, with your indulgence, I will contact Harry and discuss with him the specifics of what it is that he's taking, so that we can make it known that we are not interested in supporting it, or one way or the other. I can bring it back to council next week for further discussion. I realize that it really is meant for a committee of the whole, but at the same time, Roma is happening in January, so we need to get clear as to what our supports are. Thank you, Councilor. Okay, any further other business before we move on to matters arising from the standing committees? Councilor Meady?
Thank you, Your Worship, and to kind of go with Councilor Corral's kind of thinking here, we have different conferences that we go to, and it is with great expense to the township. I was able to make it to one last year, but delegation, it costs us some money. And I'm not sure whether we get our true value out of it. But I realize there's a lot of networking, and if there's delegation who actually can get the voice of certain people to bring stuff back to our township, then it's of value. But if we don't have that, I'm not sure whether the number of people that attend is required.
Councilor Oldie.
Through you, Your Worship, I'd like to support Councilor Mady's view. One thing that distressed me about the whole thing was that we didn't do any kind of after-action review for our constituents. I was asked questions about it, and I wanted to write one, but when I looked at the AMO site or whatever it was, they hadn't filed reports either. So a lot of the subject areas were not populated. You couldn't do it. You couldn't make a reference.
I think that as of this year, I don't believe we have a schedule coming up for attendees through, we have dates, but we have not selected or appointed anybody who would like to attend for whatever reason. I am attending Roma on behalf of the county. They take care of me there. But I think, to your point, Councillor Oldie, I think it was very valuable for councillors to go to one or the other last year, mainly to get a feel for a lot of what's covered in some of these different, the Roma was excellent from the point of view that gives you perspective, rural versus urban, obviously northern versus rural, because they're two totally different things. And you get an appreciation for what it is that we do have here. But the point is well taken that we should be sending people for specific reasons to be going to these conferences, not just for general knowledge gathering, which is still not a bad idea depending on what it is you're looking for, depending on the agenda. Councillor Rowe.
With respect to that precisely, this council could easily put together before Roma and before the delegations are made by county, we could put together, if we felt necessary, recommendations for the county to take those delegations forward. They have more weight than we do. It's as simple as that. And also, by their very nature, they've been around a long time. They know things. They know people.
Well,
so it would be upon us to give a little direction to county.
And I'm happy to take that direction back to county at any given time. The other thing that I will say is that we're fortunate enough to have an excellent member of provincial parliament here, that if we ever had a very specific need, I have no doubt that if we said we needed to get into the Minister of Environment's office for this specific reason, that we'd get that meeting. And while I can appreciate these delegations are important at these conferences, they're literally 15 minutes. You're in, you're out, you have to state your point, and they're listening to 30 a day or more. And I'm not saying it's not valuable, but I'm saying that if you're going to make the effort to go through putting together a presentation, you don't want to do one of 50 in a day if you're trying to make a point, in my opinion. But certainly valuable. It's just if we really want to dig our heels in on something, I think we have the ability to get there. Councillor Jameson, you want to add something?
Well, on that point, I have a certain point of view on how effective those kinds of lobby exercises are. What I really wanted to raise was, in this context though, is that we have a very high expectation of the mayor to be our voice of council, and we're not spending a lot of time reviewing the county. We're not spending a lot of time taking a look at what is going on in county. Meanwhile, we send out a tax bill every year that includes the county our expectation. And frankly, I would like to see internally, we talk about delegations, we talk about some way we can shadow, not that we don't have, I have full confidence in the mayor to represent our interests, but it's just that how can we monitor what's going on? We sit around here and monitor what's going on in our township, but the county, the mayor has to monitor us monitoring the township and take care of the county. Should we not look at some form of internal mechanism to be reviewing, at the very least, reviewing minutes in order to be able to catch these things? Because I won't think of it unless somebody says, here's the minutes, read them, if you know what I mean. So let's just put it on the table, for food for thought going into the next budget year.
And I appreciate that interest. So, CAO?
I just wanted to add, Your Worship, that staff has talked about that. We could echo what Councillor Jameson said, that with our interest in our counterparts in getting a better relationship and with the county. The other aspect is with regard to the budget, with regard to funding councillors to go to these conferences. That amount is going in the budget, but we'll be bringing to council's attention that could be spent on anything that council saw fit, like alternate ways of getting information. And senior staff is being directed, we're cutting back or being selective in who we send and make sure that there are reports coming back from these conferences, if that's what we're going to. So we're investing in bringing it back. So it'll be in the budget, it'll be something you can discuss the budget time, just how that's going to be spent. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any further comments in regards to any of the discussion?
recognizing a very short time. I attended a public meeting at another township, and it was regarding industrial and so on. And I just want to throw it on the table that this is something that this township should probably be considering. And what had come up at this adjacent township was the minimum distance setbacks for hemp and cannabis, which are ruled, the applications are separate from Canada. But there are no, when I read those applications, there are no specific sizes except for minimum being, but it can be large. And in southwestern Ontario, there's one of over 100 acres.
So you're speaking about front of Young's meeting?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes. At any rate, I think that we might want to go in front of that. I'm not sure it's important, but we should have that discussion at this township. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Goodman has something to add to that.
Very briefly, Councilor Gorella, if you'd like to offline, I can certainly provide you an update. We've had some very exciting opportunities and developments and conversations regarding industrial hemp here in our township.
That's what I was going to talk about.
Councilor O'Keefe.
I think we're moving towards number 6, matters arising.
We're rising from the standing committees. Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Please use your microphone.
Thank you, Your Worship. 3 things pertaining to the library. There has been a petition launched out of Seeley's Bay, focused on the Seeley's Bay Library and its services. It will be circulated to everybody here. It was an initiative of a citizen, and it garnered over 200 signatures, which is significant for Seeley's Bay. Essentially, they want the same library services that Lansdowne has, or the same access to it locally. I did some analysis separate from that, and unprompted by that, to look at library services and requirements. It's hard to parse the population of the township the way census is done now. But roughly speaking, for each citizen in Lansdowne and Seeley's Bay, there are 5 book borrowings per year. In Lyndhurst, that goes for 8 book borrowings for each citizen per year. If you crunch those numbers and you translate it into something called social impact, which is, in that regard, literacy, sport literacy, entertainment, education, and just civilized place to meet people. The library carries a lot more weight in the village of Lyndhurst than it does almost anywhere else in the township. Just a point to think about as the library considers how to dispense services. And the third thing is, again, okay, run back to the petition. The petition was only focused on Seeley's Bay quite strictly by the author, but in my view it applies to all of Ward 2, just the way it was looked at, and the sort of people responded to it. The other thing is that out of Lyndhurst there will probably become a certain amount of pressure to acquire more property, such as the United Church, which is for sale, as social space. It's been suggested to me in Lyndhurst that the existing library building and its backyard could be sold and the property acquired. That's something that we will probably hear more about. I'm neutral on it for now, personally.
Thank you very much for that update. Any notices of motion? Mayor's update, 1 minute or less. The gala for the chamber was a huge success. Thank you to all the members of council who attended. It was a great showing and a great support of all of our local businesses and the award winners that evening. They worked very hard to build the power of our community. Other very successful holiday events. Lansdowne is going to be this Thursday. Seeley's Bay had their tree lighting on Friday, as well as the small halls where our Councillor Oakey was the MC and had a great time. And it was very wonderful attendance as well. Congratulations to Rapid Valley for their hosting a reopening party this Friday between 5 and 7. And a reminder that Thursday afternoon, plenty of drop-in sessions are canceled December 19th to early January. Second public info session regarding Rockport Strategic Plan Review and Transportation Study is scheduled for December 12th at the Rockport Rec Hall. And it's a big week next week as we recognize our community builders and community grant winners, as well as fire service awards that are being celebrated at the beginning of the meeting next week at 6 p.m. Just another reminder, do not park on streets in the villages after, is it 11 or midnight? 11, because snow plows need to clear those streets in order to accommodate traffic and further parking during the day. Lots of opportunity to help people who are less fortunate this holiday season, toy drives, volunteers, you can donate to food banks, sponsor a family, purchase a gift for a senior. Just find out how Trish, who works in our office here in community building or community business services, she can connect you with someone in need. And the office will be closed during the Christmas holidays on the 25th and the 26th. But please, if you are concerned about whether the waste sites are open or if the office is open, please check online before you come in. And last but not least, it was alluded to, our beloved tower that was at the top of the hill here, just not far from the township office, did fall down today, and it does not exist anymore. It was a microwave tower for many years. It's been out of commission for about 10, but it's a sort of a landmark that is no longer. And we'll be letting people were very upset about this today. So I just wanted to make an official announcement that we are fully aware that this came down and nobody was harmed in the falling down of said structure.
I want to rebuild.
And apparently the deputy mayor wants it rebuilt. But anyways, thank you for your patience, and thank you for all the staff who were patient during these long meetings this evening, but the councilors who continue to dedicate. The only last piece I'd like to say before I go, and I realize that I'm over by 1 minute. As of tomorrow, we've been sworn in for 1 year. 1 year. And I think we've done a fairly good job considering. And that's a pat on our own backs, but civil discourse goes a long way. Competent staff goes even further, so thank you to the staff. And we definitely couldn't have done this without you. And I personally appreciate all the cooperation from all the councilors, so thank you for supporting this council, but supporting me, and as well as the staff at hand that make this look easier than it actually is, so thank you. Okay, moved by Deputy Mayor Lackey, seconded by Councillor Olkey, that committee will make adjourned. Non-debatable motion, all those in favor? All those